Okay, let's start getting this going here, folks. Turn down the music a little bit. Okay. Hey guys, what's up? David Stewart here. It's time for the Writestream. It happens every Wednesday at 6 p.m. for right now. And before I dig into today's topic, which is story as a vehicle, this is an extremely important topic, I think, for artists and for anyone who interacts with art in general in society to think about and understand. And it's one of the things that actually gets lost, I think, with a lot of music history classes and a lot of art history classes, is they lose sight of what art is really about. And this is partly a product of both the modern and postmodern periods. So hopefully everything is going good here, and you can see me and you can hear me. Preview looks fine online, so let's go ahead and dig into it. We're going to start with just a little bit of site news. So I had mentioned in the past that let me turn off my AC here. That's probably really loud. So I have a little AC in my room because this is the hottest room in the house. My office always ends up as the hottest room in the house. And eventually I'm going to build a new office in my part of my garage. But for now I'm in a hot room. So that's why I had that noisy AC. So hopefully you can hear me a little bit better. Let's start with some channel news. So I had mentioned that the Writestream will eventually, I'll transition to a different kind of stream. And so the question is really when I want to do that. There's several reasons why I would want to stop doing a stream focusing on writing. But the main one is I don't want to continue a project or continue a series longer than I'm passionate about it and longer than I have important things I feel like to say. So my thoughts about the Writestream is really how I'd like to kind of tie up what I've done over the past not quite a year. So this is Writestream number 35. So I've been 35 of these streams, which is pretty good. What I wanted to do to finish it up was to actually do a 4 or 5 week open course in writing. I've talked about my 4 steps of book creation. So I'd like to apply that and basically tie everything that I've talked about over the past 4 years together into one open course that anyone could either do later in a date or just jump into as part of the live streams. Sorry about the phone notification. Either jump into this as part of the live streams when they're live, and basically over the course of 5 weeks you'll write a short book. I've gone ahead and I've piloted this with several short books, including my newest one, Voices of the Void. As far as I know, you can still get this for joining my my mailing list at dvspress.com/list. All the links should still be live. Eventually that'll go away, but I just wanted to give it away to everybody just to see if they liked it, because it was such a different kind of project. It's very experimental for me. No scene breaks, genre and style that I haven't used before, themes that I haven't used before. So it's very experimental. Another experimental one that I think is great, I mean, I'm very, very proud of this book, is Chronocyte. Both of these books are basically books that they're very short, but they're basically books that I've been trying to do this for almost 2 years now. Let's write and publish something in a limited amount of time. So the way I'd like to finish this project called the Writestream up is to have an open course where you can begin, and I'll take step by step and show everything through the live streams. And that way on the live stream, if I'm not clear on something, you can just ask in chat, hey, what do you mean by this? What did you mean by this last week? And I can just correct it right there, just like it's at a college seminar or something like that. But write and put a book into market, into your hand at the end of that course. So that would involve a 1 week planning period, moving into drafting, 2 to 3 weeks of drafting, because that's usually the most labor intensive part, a week of editing, and then a week of doing all the publication details, and then your book is out. So it would take 5 to 6 weeks to do it. This would be basically allow anybody who's struggling to try to get something out, or just having a hard time pulling in all the massive amount of details that's required to self-publish a work down into one space. And this will be focusing on fiction. And maybe once I have more experience with graphic novels, I can restart what I did and maybe do one like how to publish how to publish your graphic novel, or how to publish a comic book, a floppy book in 30 days, because that's what Marvel and DC do, right? They publish a book every 30 days for each series that they do. And I think that that's something that's attainable for a limited number of individuals. You got to remember that there's a team of artists that work on it, but they do everything in 30 days. So presumably you should be able to apply some of these lessons to the comic world, but I don't know enough about the publishing process to do that. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of learning in order to teach that. So that's what I'm thinking about how to end this. The question is whether I want to do this maybe as part of November, the National Novel Writing Month, or just do it, in the next few weeks here, because I really want to start up a new stream that's going to focus on people's work. That's, get comic artists on, get novelists on, get filmmakers on, to just talk about what they're putting out, and just talk about the art that we love, the things that we love that inspired us, and also to promote new works. So we could do a little bit of positive change in what I consider a bit of a decadent, as far as art goes. I think our society is somewhat decadent. I mean, it's decadent in other ways, but definitely when it comes to art, the art tends to be hollow, corporate. People are very unsatisfied with these unaccountable corporations and the way that they have taken over people's art and continue to put it out like these continual official fan fiction zombies of what they once were. So anyway, that's the plan. It's not that I'm going to stop talking about writing. I'll still put out content probably once a week on a writing subject, either drawn from some of the things I've talked about on the stream, or just new things, rather than doing an entire stream dedicated to it. And it's also part of my understanding, and I've learned this over the years, and I've come back to it, which is that things have a limited shelf life. Anything that you do, as far as your passion in it, your ability to do it at a highly competent level, I think you have a shelf life for anything that you're doing. This is one of the reasons that you can look at like really long established musicians or musical acts or bands, and it's really rare that they continue to get better. It's usually that they settle into a formula and then they get boring. And there's big exceptions. And for all the criticisms I may have against Metallica, I think they're actually a great example. They've never really stuck with one style. They've always been trying to change it up every single album, so it keeps it fresh. But it's, you want to avoid that. So you don't want to get stuck in a rut. And the other thing is, I notice people on YouTube, especially because YouTube, your window of relevancy is usually pretty short. It's like a year, if you're lucky. So they get kind of distraught that their view counts start to collapse after a year of relevancy, and they're like, what happened? And it's like, well, viewers move on, they get bored, they get interested in something else, and you have to kind of reinvent yourself pretty often. Something that I've done really over my life is I've changed something about my life once a year. And whether that's where I live or, what I'm doing for work, I've always changed something once a year, going on now for about 10 years. So I've spent the last 10 years changing something big about my life every year. I've moved, lived in a different house or a different city, changed jobs, changed professions, got married, had a kid, had another kid, changed job, everything that I've done. So every year I've changed something up about what I'm doing, because that keeps you fresh and interesting, keeps you interested in what you're doing, keeps your passion going, so that you're always feeling like you're moving forward. You never feel like you're just maintaining. It's one of the most boring places to be in, is that you're just doing what you've done. You're maintaining what you've done, and you're not growing anywhere. So that's something that I really, am aware of. And so I really want this stream to be good up until the end, and to be a permanent resource for people to look at and enjoy later on, but for the next live event to be something that focuses on creations rather than how to create. I'm still going to do tons of writing content, so don't feel like you need to unsub or anything like that. Let's check the chat before I dig into the lecture and talk about the big concepts today, because if you couldn't hear me over my AC, what I said was story as a vehicle. The concept of what a story is, or what art is, has kind of been lost through what I would call the academy, the university system, whatever you want to call it. The establishment that tends to monopolize, declare itself a monopoly on what art is and isn't, has forgotten some of these concepts about what art is as a vehicle and what art is in terms of style. And I'm going to talk about some of these things. A lot of people have forgotten what the elements of story are apart from the purpose of story. Let's take a look at chat. Hopefully you guys are doing good. Looks like everything's going good. I had a little bit of a stream hiccup 2 weeks ago, and I don't know what that was from. I'm interested to find out what story is going to be a vehicle for. Story as a vehicle just means that it's not just about events, that there's meaning behind the story. It's a vehicle for politics. It's a vehicle for moral lessons. It's a vehicle for religion. And then the last thing I'll talk about is it's a vehicle for itself. The medium is a vehicle for its own self, which is a weird thing to think about, but something we're very used to in the modern world, but we're not keenly aware of what that really means. And I want to dig into that. Let's see here. How's the family? They're good. Thank you for, I've been trying to have the uploads be good. I changed my format to go to 7 days. It's near to 7 days a week as I can manage. Where I record basically everything on Saturday. I come up with a bunch of topics that feel like I can talk about or I think are relevant or interesting, some information I want to give out, some discussions I want to have with people, and I put them out there. The meta level is, I try right now to do, and I'm experimenting with this, I'm trying to do one piece of negative content per week and then like 6 pieces of positive or technical content. So I had 2 actually pieces of negative content over the weekend, and what happens is that the negative content really gets people's attention. So my views go up, but it's not just the views on the main video. Like I did one on like the bleak future of remakes, because I was very upset that the Lion King remake grossed a lot of money. It just, you kind of hope people are going to be smarter than they are, and then when they're not, it's just a little depressing. So I did that, and then I did a review of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which has actually gotten more views, and it's a negative review, and it's not, I don't feel like I'm unkind or unfair to it, and I think most of the people who disagreed with me felt I wasn't unkind about it. There was just some things that I really didn't like about it, and really weren't for me, and I could see how other people might like it, but just the fact that it was titled, I Do Not Like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, gets lots of attention and lots of hatred, but that hatred actually kind of feeds the algorithm. So if you do some negative content, it gets a lot of eyes on your page, and then you can hopefully fulfill viewer expectations with better, positive content that makes people feel better about something or is more interesting than just this movie sucks. Anyway, that's what I'm trying to do. So I'll have another piece of negative content on Friday, I think. Yeah, on Friday. And so then I get to see how that's going to affect some stuff I want to see on Saturday and Sunday. So over the weekend, you do the negative thing, and then you do a bunch of positive stuff to follow that up. And that's kind of the cycle that I'm going for. So if you are managing social media, whether it is YouTube or something else, that's something you'll find. There's an anti-fragile effect to that which is negative. But things which are positive that you want people to really feel good about, they don't necessarily pay attention to due to the noise. You have to play the game a little bit, and that's kind of what I'm trying to do. So I appreciate that, Cody, saying that it's good content. Cody says, did you lose weight? Mostly in the beard. This is a great lesson here. I'm going to look at myself in the camera for a second so I can see myself better. I had it like over on this other monitor. So yeah, I just made my beard shorter. So something I found out was I accidentally shaved off my beard a while back, and I actually didn't have to stream that week because I had something else going on. So I didn't, and I just let the beard grow back like a week's worth of growth, which this is like a week, 10 days worth of growth. And my beard grows fairly fast. It grows a little faster in the winter, which I guess is a thing. Like your hair grows faster in the winter. Anyway. People are like, oh man, you lost a bunch of weight. Now the thing is I cut a bunch of weight this year, but nobody noticed until I cut the beard off. So the reality is that if you're wearing like a heavy beard, it's going to make you look heavier. It's going to hide the definition of your face. Like, when I smile, let's see, I don't know which side it is. I have like dimples, right? You're not going to notice that I have like dimples in my cheeks unless unless I have the beard cut off and you can see the skin underneath, right? But I don't want to shave it completely off because then I look like kind of a fat baby, even though I'm not really fat. The other thing is shirts that fit. So this shirt actually doesn't fit that good, but I'm kind of out of clean shirts. So you wear shirts that fit, and all of a sudden you look better. So better fitting clothes and a thinner beard will make you look thinner. Other things that'll make you look thinner, and I'll make a video just on like YouTube setup for anybody that wants to make videos if you're thinking about it. You know, what lights I use. So if your light is very directly on your face and it's bright, it's going to make you look thinner and younger than you are. So you probably don't notice the bags under my eyes unless I could turn off this light, and all of a sudden I might look more tired, you know, and kind of chunkier. But you put that light on your face and you're gonna look. That's why people use those ring lights, is they light up their eyes, you know, make their eyes look have those eye reflections, and it just makes you look younger to have a really direct light like you're outside. So that's a little tip there too. That's something I figured out. So yeah, I did lose a little bit of weight, but nobody noticed till I cut the beard off. And I said I was. I explained how I was going to do it. I was going to eat the same thing every day, and that's what I do. I eat the same thing every day. Every 6 weeks, I take an accounting of what I've done, and then I adjust my diet down. So the calories are always going down. And I've done this before. Like I lost 100 pounds at one point, which was a whole thing. You know, it's a process. And I got in great shape and was like, you know, sliced and diced. It's diced to the socks, baby. But it's hard to maintain that. And what I realized back then, I know I'm rambling, but what I realized back then is like as soon as life got more complicated and I couldn't work out like 3 hours a day with extreme intensity, I started gaining weight back, and I had to adjust that because, you know, if you're running, you know, if you're doing intense cardio for like an hour a day and you're weightlifting for 2 hours a day, like, you know, morning and night and all the stuff that goes with it, you can have a really dirty diet and it actually doesn't matter that much. You know, you can eat a donut every day. I used to eat a donut or a candy bar every day just because if I didn't eat it, I would have lost too much weight. I wouldn't have been eating enough calories to like maintain the way I looked. And I had like I had 6-pack abs and everything, and I was eating candy every day. But that was just the amount of athletic activity I was doing. As soon as that activity went down, you notice it right away. So it's really hard to out-exercise your diet. That's what I learned. And then when I moved, you know, I just wasn't keeping track of anything. I gained like 20 pounds probably when I moved houses, which happens. You know, you get depressed about things like that, and you just stop maintaining your discipline and focusing on. It's hard to focus on diet when you're focusing on I got to move my household, my wife's pregnant, my kids, all this stuff's happening to kids, you know, that kind of stuff. Anyway, let's keep looking. Enough about me. You hear about the Sony Disney Spider-Man fallout? Yeah, and I'm actually kind of glad about it. And I think there's more to it than what we're seeing. The first thing that happened was a bunch of Disney shills came out and started blaming Sony. Sony wanted to keep the deal that they had. Disney wanted more money. So I kind of blame Disney. But overall, it's like I haven't really been satisfied with Spider-Man stuff since the first couple Spider-Man movies, which weren't even really that good when you go back and watch them. They were just, to me, very true to the feeling of the comics. Because I grew up with Spider-Man, you know. So I'm just not that interested in having more Spider-Man stuff out there. So it's kind of cool to just put a break on it. We've had 3 reboots of Spider-Man, and it's like I'm tired of it. And then the whole Spider-Man Spider-Verse like spin-off, it's its own thing. You know, you have so much Spider-Man when you stop and think about it. It's really too much. Jared says he enjoys the Writestreams. I appreciate that. What are your thoughts on why there's so many orphans in fiction? Just curious, is there some kind of narrative or thematic reason for it? Absolutely. I have an answer to that, and that is it invokes sympathy. So that's the first thing. If you have an orphan, then you immediately feel sympathetic for the character. So it's just to get the reader or the viewer on the side of the protagonist if he's an orphan. You have this Great Expectations. So one of the reasons Great Expectations works is it starts with an orphan. You start with sympathy and then you move into actual identifying things with him. Harry Potter works because he's an orphan, so immediately you feel sympathy for him. he's an abused child, so you feel extra sympathy for him. But that also heightens the desire to escape from the life of abuse and misfortune into something special. And you actually see that in Great Expectations as well. So the whole idea of Great Expectations, really, that's what Harry Potter is in a way. And it's not that Rowling or Rowling. Everyone's always correcting how I say her name. I'm going to call it Rowling because I had Rowling baseballs. Call them Rowling baseballs. We didn't call them rolling baseballs. Call them Rowling. And get some Rowling baseballs and go play ball. Anyway. I don't think she specifically was like, I'm going to rip off Great Expectations. It's just a literary theme that's been used and abused, and Great Expectations is a great early example of it. So he escapes from his life of poverty into one of importance and gentry, and then, of course, everything's revealed to be different from how he thought it was towards the end of the book. Whereas Harry Potter, it's an escape to importance, meaning, specialness, fantasy, all of these things. So it heightens the escape. There's two reasons. The main reason is it gets people on the side of the protagonist right away. You feel sympathy for them. Whatever emotion you can start with, you can build on that. Let's keep looking here. Same thing with Luke Skywalker. Anything else? Disney Star Wars is a good example of a corporation taking a franchise and putting up. Yes. They just say, yeah, of course this is actually Star Wars. Like, the only guy who's left is, I think, John Williams. So just listen to the score. And actually, I know that they cut parts of John Williams' score out of Force Awakens. Steven Spielberg has a great shelf life. In your new stream, might you have a section of each stream set aside after talking to any guests? Yes, of course. I want the audience to talk to the guests too, not just me. It's not just like, I don't want it to just be the Late Show with David Stewart. So now I want people to field questions. That's what's cool about this. That's why YouTube works, is that it's two ways. It's truly social rather than TV. Like TV, you're just passively watching something and you have no input over what's there. You don't even, turning off the TV actually doesn't even send signals to the TV corporation at all. Only like the Nelson ratings matter to them. So if you're not a Nelson, if you don't have that Nelson machine, like you're watching or not watching doesn't do anything. Funny thing to think about. Most of the rumors about episode 9 say that time travel will probably be the focus of the film. Is there any way that time travel can actually work in a Star Wars film? I don't know, but time travel is usually, in this case, so using time travel to fix something is usually the result of laziness and a sign that the story has gotten out of control of the writer. Now, time travel as a specific thing in a specific story, not necessarily, right? Like Back to the Future is about time travel. We've never had time travel in Star Wars before, travel back in time. That was how they solved things in Avengers, right? And I said that when Avengers, the Avengers 3 came out. What's it called? Not Endgame, but whatever it is. Infinity War. When that came out, I said, they're going to undo everything using time travel. And people are like, oh, no, they're not. These people, I'm like, there's no way they're killing off Black Panther when they've only given him one solo movie and it was a huge hit. There's no way that's happening. They are bringing these people back, period. And they're going to do it through time travel. And that's exactly what they did. They time traveled to snap everyone back into existence. And people are like, oh, well, they didn't time travel to kill Thanos. It's like, no, they still time traveled to solve the problem. I knew that they would do that. It's ridiculous. Anyway. So, yeah, I don't think it'll be good. If they do time travel, it's not going to be good. It's going to be bad. People are looking forward to me shredding it. I'll probably watch it simply because of that. I had doubts about watching episode 8. I didn't want to watch it. I didn't watch Rogue One. And people are like, you got to go see it because you're the guy who shits on Star Wars. I'm like, okay, you're right. If you guys want me to see it, I'll see it. It's not always about me and my desires. Like if I was just one guy sitting out here by myself with nobody interacting with me, I wouldn't go. But the fact that there's going to be a million people who want my take on it and then want to either disagree with me or or share it. I gotta do it. Have you ever gotten to enjoy the Pride of Chanur series? I have not. Sorry. A Film Girl, random one. If I mentioned you, by the way, if you want me to pay attention to the comment, use the @DavidStewart. Otherwise, I'm going to assume you're talking to someone else because chat gets kind of crowded. Even though there's not a ton of people watching right now, there's only 62, which is, I've done better in the past, but I appreciate all 62 people watching. I really do. But if you put @DavidStewart, then I'll know that you want to talk to me rather than responding to another comment. Random one. If I mentioned you in one of your books in one of my stories, would I need to pay you? Absolutely not. So the way copyright works, it's not as complicated. People are very afraid of like violating copyright rules because of things that they hear that aren't fully explained. No, you can quote. You can so you could quote me on social media. That's not a violation of copyright. You could put quotes out of the book on social media. That's not a violation. That's all fair use. You can mention the book. That's all fair use. You can mention the characters in the book. That's all fair use. The place where it doesn't fall under fair use is if you are writing a sequel to the book. Then you're making a derivative work that is completely dependent on the original work. Now, if you were to write a sequel to the book but changed all the names of the characters, you'd actually be fine. So if Tauku Yoshio was someone else, different name, but it was basically the same characters, I actually couldn't sue you or anything. So it doesn't matter. Most of that stuff you're totally good. You could quote whole paragraphs. You could quote song lyrics. The only time, I should say the rule of thumb for when you really can't do it, is if you are reprinting the entirety of a work, or your use of the work constitutes a majority of what you're doing. So I think the gray area would be if you printed an entire published work by me and then like wrote in the margins. I think that's where the line ends up getting crossed. But you also have things like Detective Pony. If you've never read Detective Pony, you can just go Google it. Google Detective Pony and prepare to laugh. It's a very funny thing. Basically, it's a dude who took this series of pony books written for like 9-year-old girls and just completely altered it until it became really a recomposition of the original book. There's great lines, but when it comes to quoting something or mentioning it, absolutely not. That's not it's not a gray area at all. That's totally black and white. So most of the time what you're doing is fair use. If you trust the tickle in your conscience, like kind of ripping this person off, chances are you are, right? And actually you can copy story elements and it's not a violation of copyright at all. It's interesting. There was who was it who wrote? I think it was Harlan Ellis. There was a writer who sued the makers of Terminator for ripping off one of his stories, and actually, I don't think he would have won in court. Harlan Ellison. I'm trying to remember the name of the writer. He's a very famous writer, but his name's escaping me. He wrote City on the Edge of Tomorrow. He used to write for Outer Limits. He used to write sci-fi books and stuff. And the studio settled with him, and James Cameron didn't agree with that. He's like, no, it wasn't a rip-off of that. And his story, the original story, was about two soldiers time traveling back 800 years and then finding each other in our time. And so Terminator, to me, was really quite different. And it's like, well, there's a time-traveling soldier, but is that enough? And I don't think it is, personally. Have you considered shaving your beard to look like a mustache on your chin and braiding your hair into 2 braids and tying them in a bow under your chin? It could be your trademark. I have not considered that, and I'm probably not going to do it. Keep in mind, I'm married, and I have to maintain that marriage. So the way I look is the way my wife wants me to look. Your video on Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse made me think about other culture war ideas being in Infinity War and Endgame movies. With this in mind, could Thanos be Jesus? I don't think so. I don't think he's Jesus. I don't think that they were going for that way. So the thing is, I don't think Satanists can make, inversions like that, but nihilists tend to not just don't know enough about the religion to try to make a Jesus figure out of someone like Thanos. I don't think Thanos is intended to be Jesus at all. Have you considered not shaving your beard for 6 months so that you can have a Gandalf beard? My wife wouldn't allow it. Same idea. Darkspawn says he lost 100 pounds with the span of 4 months. Then I started getting sick very often, very easily. I weighed 246 pounds. I weighed 157 pounds after. That's extreme. I'd say healthy weight loss is probably 2 pounds a week max. Not water, right? Because I could, if I cut salt out, I could lose 10 pounds overnight. So I could lose 10 pounds like in a couple days. That's how fighters do it. Is they walk around at 215. Then they cut the salt out of their diet in the week leading up to it, go sweat out a bunch of water and get down to 205, weigh in, and then, go back up to 212 or whatever when they do the fight. Yeah, that doesn't sound super, super healthy. So I could see that. It's going to weaken a bunch of things about you. You have that much cortisol going through your body, you're going to get adrenal burnout and things like that from really extreme dieting, which is not what I do. Whoops, jump down here. Says my immune system was weakened by my extreme loss of weight. Oh, there you go. Because I pushed myself too far too fast. Absolutely. Bob says he's late. It's okay. I haven't even gotten to the lecture. Rolling is rolling. Rowling, whatever. I still consider Spider-Man 2 better than anything MCU's put out. Yeah, what's cheesy in the Raimi films having underappreciated merit. I agree. The thing about Spider-Man comics, I don't have any sitting right here. They're all in the garage in boxes. There's a cheesiness to Spider-Man that's kind of tongue-in-cheek and intentional, the way Stan Lee created him. He's supposed to be wisecracking, and there's kind of a layer to the jokes where the wisecracks aren't that funny, and that's kind of the joke. It's like he's trying to be funny all the time. He's trying to add levity to anything he's doing. Well, he'd be in very serious situations and making jokes. That's part of Spider-Man's charm and his appeal. And the fact that the jokes usually miss, or they're like basically dad jokes, that's part of the appeal of the character. It actually kind of humanizes him, is that the jokes are a little bit lame. And I think Sam Raimi really nailed that about the character. And I think it's something that's been kind of avoided. Actually, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse had that with Peter Parker. Like, Peter Parker had that element to him, and that is something that I probably didn't mention that was good. So that was actually very true, I think, to the character Stan Lee created, was that jokester Spider-Man who's constantly doing one-liners while he's getting his ass kicked. Do you think it would have been better if they connected Sam Raimi Spider-Man with the MCU instead of making Homecoming? I think so, but it's their show, and they're going to do it the way they want to do it. And I think they actually rebooted it. I never watched the reboots. I should watch them at some point. Did you see Abrams' Forever Young? I don't know. I saw a film called Forever Young a long time ago. Mel Gibson in it, I think. I don't remember it, though. Time travel in Star Wars. No, hell no. It's never been in any story that I know of. I've never known of time travel in Star Wars. And I think that actually is a good thing, because time travel mucks things up. Star Trek had time travel in it basically from the beginning, and it gives too many convenient solutions. My favorite time travel book was 9/22/63. I don't think I read it. I think time travel works fine if it's permanent. You're in the past and stuck there. You're flung into the future where evil is law. It only gets complicated when going back and forth. Yeah, that's a great point. So if you could simplify it, then it gets rid of the complicated nature of the story. Piss poor Dark Empire copy. Yep. If they time travel in episode 9, it'll be one of the laziest things they've done. They've done a lot of lazy things. Like the whole, we can't light speed away or they'll track us and then we'll be out of fuel. It's like, okay, well, light speed to where you have more people or something, right? Well, how are we going to solve this? I know what we'll do. We'll light speed away from the fleet to go get a hacker. Wait, you're just violating the conditions you just set up. You're just ignoring those conditions. I think the current Disney-Sony fallout is only temporary. Probably. Disney asking for 50% of the profits from Spider-Man solo films is meant to get Sony to settle on 20 or 30. Very astute, archiver. People miss this about Donald Trump. It's all about negotiation. So rather than looking at the consequences of his negotiations, they get upset that he negotiates, that he says he's going to do things which are extreme. He's like, we're going to shut off, he proposes extreme trade tariffs with China. And all the economists, all the free market economists start ripping their hair out until, like, once things are settled, like tariffs are lower on both sides. It's like, this is what you guys wanted, right? It's like, why you're not trusting the negotiation process. You're evaluating the negotiation process rather than what comes out of it, which is lower tariffs, which is better for everybody. So this is something people miss about Donald Trump, is they look at the process, not the consequences. Same thing with, like, his speech. Like, Republicans that hate Donald Trump, they look at what he says on Twitter and they're like, oh, it's such an embarrassment. It's like, this is an embarrassment that beat an unbeatable politician. You ought to give him a little bit of respect. He did what you would be incapable of doing, which is to beat Hillary Clinton in an election and not be assassinated. I didn't say that. There's a lot of historical fiction about the Roman Empire and a lot about the Middle Ages and Crusades. Why do you reckon there's less or little about the Byzantine Empire? That's a very good question. I would say because the Byzantine Empire was highly stable for a long time. And so what makes good drama is conflict. Not that there was no conflict, but, it survived until the 16th century. And some form. It whittled down to basically just like Constantinople and a couple of Greek islands. But it was stable, after the fall of Eastern Rome, it stabilized, or Western Rome, it stabilized for a number of centuries. And I think that draws less eyes to the history that's there. Even though there was conflict with all kinds of different enemies throughout those centuries. Of course, there was war, but I think it draws less eyes than the historical, we have to defend Rome from Attila, or the great Roman civil wars with, like, Pompey and Caesar and Sulla. I think it draws less eyes to it initially. I think less people study Byzantine history, including myself. I know more about classic Roman history than I know about Eastern Roman history after the fall of the West, or after the transformation of the West into what became medieval Italy. I don't know. That's my guess. Same reason that people don't write a lot of historical fiction about, some highly stable. For instance, like, my samurai book is in the Sengoku period. Sengoku period in Japan's where all the action is. It's the Warring States period. Same thing with Chinese historical fiction, tends to be in where there's war between the states. Tends to be a little bit more dramatic. Let's see here. What are your thoughts on destiny, fate, or karma? I think that I'll explain this in a video, but the idea of say, free will and destiny being in opposition to one another is a great theme, but it's not one that is necessarily in opposition. Let me explain it really quickly. So let's say you're sitting at a blackjack table and you're playing blackjack. So there's a way that you're going to play blackjack. You're trying to win your money. And so you're going to make decisions based on the cards that you get and the likelihood that you imagine, or, the odds that of getting a particular card to win a hand, hoping to know what the dealer's got, or, hoping to beat the dealer, things like that. Now, imagine that there's a person who knows all the order of the cards in the deck. So that's God, right? So God knows the order of the cards in the deck. You don't. So you have free will over the way that you're playing the hands, even though the order of the cards, once they're shuffled, it's completely deterministic. The order of the cards has already been set when the deck has been shuffled. So at that point, it's not random. It's only random. The cards are only coming at random to you. They're not coming at random to the deck itself. And so what we see here is that there's actually not, this tends to be called the compatibilist view of destiny, which is that, like, will and destiny are not in opposition. Literarily, there's a couple of great themes that you can work with destiny. So I believe that there's, that God has a plan, and things are they're deterministic in ways that we often don't understand. And I see that because the outcomes of my life have not necessarily been the result of my actions. it's a conclusion that came to me after being a person that's like, yeah, you reap what you sow. It's like, I have not reaped what I have sown, and what I have sown has been stolen from me. So that makes me think of a more deterministic worldview. But that doesn't mean that you have no control, or that you should act in a way that is not willful on your own. What is a story as a vehicle? So that means the story, there's something else that's put in the story. The story is a vehicle for some other thing, like a moral lesson or something like that. How did you figure out what to put on your copyright page at the beginning of your book? I copied other copyright pages. And you could copy mine. There's a standard format, which basically says you own the copyright of the work. So it's not ghostwritten. You're not printing a public domain work. You own the copyright of the book, and that the book is a work of fiction, which means it's not representing any person living or dead. So nobody could say that this is an act of defamation against another person. Anything like that, right? So it's a purely fictional work, and that's a bit of a legal disclaimer. That's it. Do you think Elden Ring will be good, since the word is it's by a reputed author, but the game itself is made? I don't know anything about it. Sorry. If copyright, you use a real person in your book, like my alt history, Donald Trump is a German field marshal. No, you're not violating copyright. That's a work of artistry and parody. It's not intended to represent the real Donald Trump. It does not in any way constitute defamation. Defamation would be you try to make a factual argument that Donald Trump did something he didn't do. So if you wrote in a book, Donald Trump molested these 16 women on these dates, and he didn't do that, that's defamation. Right. So that's what defamation is. It's lying. You're not lying if it's fiction, guys. Random question. I recently saw a special screening of Saving Private Ryan in my local cinema. Have you seen it recently? Not recently. I haven't seen it recently. I don't know if it's aged well. I thought it was good at the time. Not to be pessimistic, but at this point, audience will go to the theater unless it's a big spectacle. Yeah, it's just like the 60s. These cycles repeat. So in the 60s, TV had taken off. It was in a lot of homes, and it had replaced going to the cinema because it was cheaper and more convenient. So theaters were packed full of 3D movies and stuff like that. And then the cycle transitioned into an auteur-focused, director-focused model where you did experimental movies and people went to the cinema because it was an original experience. Then we went to a high-concept format with Star Wars and Jaws. And so Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, and to some extent, other directors like James Cameron, they brought in these high concept movies where it was about a big spectacle but a good story and a big concept that was original. So it's kind of a melding of those two, and now we've gone back around to it just being a repetitive spectacle and nothing original or interesting going on. All of H.P. Lovecraft's works are public domain. Absolutely true. And you can actually just Google it, and you can find a website that has all of them and read them. And then people have free audiobooks on YouTube of them. People have read the stories just so that there's a free audiobook out there. So absolutely, you can read all of H.P. Lovecraft's stuff for free. I think I got the ebook free off of Amazon, or I might have paid 25 cents for it because it was formatted better than the other ebook. There you go. Let's see here. All right, let me get to the lecture, and then I'll look more at some of the chat, because I've been in here almost an hour and I haven't done the lecture to start this out. Sorry, I'm a little congested today because of something. Yeah. Yeah, I'll look at the other stuff after I get this lecture. So here's the big idea. So story. What is a story? Well, a story is setting, characters, and plot. It's a set of fictional actions, or possibly real actions, right? We're going to focus on fiction, but a set of actions done by characters, and that's a story. Now, independent of the elements of a story, character, setting, plot, the story can communicate things above and beyond just that, right? It can communicate themes, it can communicate philosophical ideas, it can communicate moral questions, it can convey historical facts. It can do a whole bunch of other things. So stories by themselves are not just stories. Now, a story could just be a story. This is a story about a guy going to the market and running into a rabbit, and the rabbit gives him 3 wishes, and but usually what makes a story compelling is what's in with the story, what the story is a vehicle for. So just to give you an example, most fairy tales are vehicles for moral stories, just like Aesop's fable. So a fable is a vehicle for a moral point. So if we look at a fable is a story that works specifically as a vehicle for a moral point, not just a story on its own that's compelling and interesting for its own sake, but something that makes a point. So you have a fox that's trying to get to some grapes that are up on the wall. He can't reach them, and he says, those grapes are probably sour anyway. It's a very short story, but what's the point? The point is, when you can't have something, you start to think that it's bad. You start to think it's bad simply because you can't have it. It's a psychological justification for you not having something. Really, really simple and sweet example, but we have many, many other examples. If you are reading, Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is a great story in and of itself. It's a story with compelling characters that are lovable and interesting. The plot happens in a way that is unpredictable at times. It's full of incredibly interesting details of the setting. However, that story is also a vehicle for a very particular moral point, which is that power is a thing which is dangerous itself. That's what the Ring of Power represents. So the Ring of Power is power. And so it's why it's called the Ring of Power. It's why the rings are called Rings of Power. So the Ring of Power gives to somebody dominion over the world, the ability to execute their will upon the world. What's the problem with that? Well, when somebody takes up the ring, it corrupts them and makes them evil. You see this with Isildur, you see it with Gollum, you see its corrupting influence begin on Bilbo, and you see it work on Frodo as he brings it closer to its master. The entire idea is that power cannot be used morally, at least not for very long. And only the people, this is another theme, only people who have high levels of God-given power are able to actually execute power. This is a weird thing about Tolkien that I think flies a little bit under the radar, but one of the things that Aragorn said is he could use the ring, but he was afraid it would corrupt him because he was just a man. And he's a man he's an Übermensch, he's a man above men. He's capable of ruling other men because of his superior moral fortitude and his superior genetics. A lot of people won't talk about that in Tolkien, but that's a theme, is that some people are made for certain things. They're better than other men, in a sense. And so Gandalf is I could use the ring because he's of the same level of Sauron, but through me it would wield a power too terrible to imagine. Probably the only person who is capable of actually handling the ring, you see him, is Tom Bombadil. He puts the ring on his finger and it has no effect on him because power is not a temptation to him, and he is essentially a spirit that is not subject to the power of the ring. He's either he's some sort of Maiar or a Valar or something. I think he's probably a Maiar spirit. It would be weird for him to be like a Vala in disguise. But you see that, he's the only one who can resist the power of the ring because power, it doesn't have dominion over him. He's not subject to power at that point. He's probably only subject to the power of God. So it's a vehicle for those important themes. We see this with lots of other things as well. But I wanted to make this point a little bit kind of razor clear, is that there's trends about what can be put into stories, what stories can be vehicles for. And these trends come and go, and people can actually have bad reactions to stories being vehicles for certain things. When we talk about culture war stuff, and a story being a vehicle for a political point, the reason people object to that is because they didn't have an expectation that a certain kind of entertainment piece would be a vehicle for a political point. That's not obvious, and it's not direct, and therefore it becomes annoying. Just to give you an example, if you look at modern Marvel comics, which are really used as vehicles for political speech. They're not used as stories themselves, and they're not used as vehicles for moral points that the original audience for comics would actually care about. Instead, what they do is they use it as a vehicle to make some sort of feminist point or political point. And that annoys people who read comics in the 80s and 90s because that's not what those comics were created to be vehicles for. Now, if the writers of, current Spider-Man comics created their own hero that they used to be a complete, their own stories that were vehicles for their own political opinions, it probably wouldn't be nearly, there wouldn't be any controversy. Because it'd be like, he's writing SJW comics. I like Spider-Man. Spider-Man, though, was still used as a vehicle for very particular moral points. This is why the idea of things being apolitical, I think, is short-sighted and just not true. So Spider-Man has to learn a very important moral lesson as part of his origins, is that he uses his power for selfish reasons. And so because he uses his power for selfish reasons and refuses to adhere to the responsibility of having power, he ends up not being able to prevent the death of a loved one, Uncle Owen. So that has a big impact on him and changes his outlook to be one that is much more altruistic and much less self-focused. If Ayn Rand were to write Spider-Man, she would have written a completely different set of events in that, because those events represent an important moral point, which is that if you have power, you have a responsibility to use that power wisely or for the good of other people, for the good of society. It's fundamentally an altruistic message. And so altruism, of course, is political. Telling people to be altruistic is part of political speech. This is why people get angry when you say that you don't think there should be welfare, as they think it's some function of altruism, or vice versa. Somebody doesn't give anything to charity. They don't give their alms to the church. Then they're acting selfishly. They're not acting in an altruistic and focused on helping the world kind of manner. So there's not a strong political history in Spider-Man, but that is a political point. The thing is as time goes on, the creation of Steve Ditko and Stan Lee has become a vehicle for things which Steve Ditko and Stan Lee never intended for him to be a vehicle for. Even as Stan Lee said that the Miles Morales character back in 2010 or whenever he was made, I think he's great. That's Stan's opinion, and it's an opinion of a derivative work of his own work. But for fans, that's not their expectation. Their expectation isn't to have various colored replacements for the heroes that they grew up with, but to have adventures that are within the realm of what is been established prior. Same thing with Star Wars. People don't like Star Wars being a vehicle for political ideas that are outside of the political ideas that George Lucas created. George Lucas's work is political. You have an evil empire, you have a republic of diversity. You could go down a very long rabbit hole talking about the political messaging that exists, particularly in the prequels. But it's that another person took that art and superimposed additional things. They saw Star Wars not as a chance to tell Star Wars, not for it to be Star Wars itself, but for it to be a vehicle for other things they wanted to talk about. There are numerous literary examples throughout history of books being created specifically to tell moral stories or political stories. 1984, one of my favorite books. Animal Farm, both of those by George Orwell. You have Fahrenheit 451. Lots of science fiction is a vehicle for political points. All the way back, you have The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, which, oddly enough, it drew attention to I think, bad conditions in slaughterhouses. But it was intended to be a vehicle for socialist idea. It was a socialist propaganda piece. But we forget the socialist context of it, and we look at a different historical context of it. I actually can't remember the story very well because I read it as part of a literature class, and I just remember it being very boring. So I just kind of remember the professor's very shallow points on it. Now, here's the thing that we tend to have lost track of when it comes to art being a vehicle for things as time has gone on. Starting in the 20th century, you start to have these trends that we call generally modernism and postmodernism. In literary circles, you will hear this also called as structuralism and post-structuralism. but structuralism could be something that's a little bit more specific. But in general, the trends are modernism and postmodernism. What are they? Modernism focuses on this idea that rather than the story being a vehicle for something else, or the story simply existing to be compelling on its own, a story can just be compelling on its own. The story is a vehicle for the medium. I'm going to give you a really good example that you can read. Maybe you have read it. It's called Ulysses. It's by an author named James Joyce. Most literature students have to read this book at some point, and most literature professors that I've met tend to think of it as a very good book. Now, it can be a very good book depending on your perspective. Just like all things, it's a matter of perspective. Here's the thing about Ulysses. Ulysses is not an original story. It's a retelling of the Odyssey, and it's specifically made to be a retelling of the Odyssey. The Odyssey, in this case, the story called the Odyssey, is a vehicle for what James Joyce does with the book, which is employ a variety of different styles. So the book is not about the story. The book, which should be about story, the book is actually about his creative use of prose and his creative use of style. So as you read it, each section of the book uses a different style from the 19th century. Up through what would be contemporary to James Joyce. And that's intentional. It's intended to be interesting for people who are analyzers of literature rather than it being a good story. So starting in the modern period, you have this very interesting reversal of form and function, where the story no longer is a vehicle for an important moral point, but rather the story is a vehicle for the medium. It's like going backwards, right? The proper way to write a story, I say the proper way, this is the way I write stories. Style, the way that you write prose, the kind of characters you put in, the way that you write dialogue, all the tools that go into writing a story, those are tools to hopefully create an effective story for a reader. You write it so that somebody reads it and understands what you're saying. There's philosophy in my books. My books are vehicles for lots of things besides just the story itself. So I'm trying to accurately communicate a story that's compelling to the reader, trying to accurately communicate my philosophical ideas in there. And the prose that I use is a tool to do it. With James Joyce, it's the opposite. The story it's not really relevant. It doesn't mean anything because it only exists to provide a framework, a structural framework in which James Joyce can exercise his creative use of prose. It is the prose that is interesting in Ulysses, not the story, because the story is old and unoriginal. It is the Odyssey, in fact. And you actually see this with a modern movie called Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? With George Clooney. This is a movie that, it's not a bad movie. It's actually a pretty stylistically interesting and cool movie, but it's the exact same things. It's Ulysses, but a film with modern techniques. It's really set about to be a story about the medium itself. Fast forward to modern movies. Quentin Tarantino is actually infamous for this. Quentin Tarantino actively uses other people's techniques from past eras in film and mixes them up because it's a fun and cool thing for him to do. One of the things about his stories is that he uses them as a vehicle for the medium rather than the medium being a tool for telling a story. Anyway, it's a role reversal. So starting with Ulysses, you have this. This is why a lot of the books of the modern period, and this has to do with the relationship with academia, right? So somebody goes to college and they study literature, and then they write the style of books that the literature teachers think are good books, and the cycle perpetuates itself. So of course, people who analyze literature are going to find highly technical stylistic changes or interesting style things in a book like Ulysses to be interesting and worth talking about. Whereas the average reader is going to find that annoying and going to be put off by it and is going to throw the book away, and instead is going to read John Carter of Mars or some other pulp story that's far more interesting in its story elements and is a more adequate vehicle for whatever philosophical ideas might actually be in that book. When you get ahead to the postmodern period, what you get is basically that one step further. So the art, rather than the art being a set of tools that you use to create a piece of art which conveys meaning to people, it is the meaning itself is relative. Because if we go back to something like Ulysses, the whole point of using the Odyssey is basically meaningless. It's just a vehicle for his style. So we've removed the meaning of the Odyssey. Now meaning is relative when you get to the postmodern period. So you can mix styles. The meaning that styles have is, because it's relative, it's therefore subjective, and it's up to the subject, the person who's reading the story, to determine what those styles mean or convey. It's a complete divorcing of the idea of artistic intent directed towards a potential reader, a potential audience member of some kind. Postmodern film does this. If you watch a movie called Blue Movie, I'm always forgetting the director. He did the soup cans. He was an artist who did, Andy Warhol. There we go. I don't know why, because he's not important to me. It's just a couple talking for 2 hours and having sex. It's basically a really bad porno. Why did he do that? Well, the whole idea of postmodernism is that the idea of art is in the subject. So a person can look at anything and decide it's art. Therefore, we're gonna take that to the extreme and rebel against all concepts of art and try to get everybody to think of anything they want as art. So if you watch something like Blue Movie, there's no story there. There's nothing there. It's not art. It's garbage. People ask me, what's a 1 out of 10 film? Blue Movie's a 1 out of 10 film. I think I forced myself to watch it years ago, and really just halfway through it, I was just like, this is just like bad pornography, People in the 60s, I'm sure, thought it was very rebellious and edgy, but it's stupid. It's pointless and it's torturous to watch. So why would you watch something like that? Well, I wouldn't. But that's where you get with the postmodern. After the postmodern, we start to get a thing called eclecticism, which is viewing all the tools as being able to be mixed and matched, but in order to produce a given effect. So if you're doing this style of writing, it's going to have this effect. And if you do that style of writing, So we start to get a more eclectic approach to writing. And I'm more of an eclecticist, probably than anything, especially with music. Like if you check out my music, Zool. It's very eclectic. It's a mixture of things intended to have a particular effect. But still, when we're going back to a revival of looking at the audience as somebody who needs to receive and understand the work, and it's not meaningless or the meaning is not up to them. It's our intent to convey the meaning, and we're trying to convey it as good as we can as artists. Now, that's not to say that that's completely taken over, quote, literature or art literature, whatever you want to call it, that which derives from the academy, still is kind of stuck trying to get out of the postmodern, trying to figure out what the hell meaning actually is at this point. I'm going to convey these ideas a little bit through some visuals and some music, if you'll allow me to, if you guys aren't completely bored by now with these ideas. Now, before I do this, I'm going to say that making the medium for its own sake is not necessarily a bad thing. Like Quentin Tarantino's movies are not bad because he specifically uses them as a vehicle for doing cool filmmaking stuff. If anything, it might enhance them, but he's an eclecticist, right? He looks at all of those techniques as something you can do that'll have a cool effect. When you watch something like Kill Bill, it's one of the most eclectic movies that you'll see that's a big movie. It's very, very eclectic with its style and its techniques that are used in it, its writing styles. It's great for what it is. It's not my favorite Tarantino movie, but all of the eclecticness makes it a very interesting experience. So Tarantino's probably more eclectic. I want to clear that up. So let me show you something here. Let's see if you guys can see this. Okay, great. So here's an example of modern art. Modern, not postmodern. So we're trying to make this delineation. So modern art is what we have here. Cubism. So Pablo Picasso did a lot of Cubist art. The point of this is, if we look at a Cubist piece of art, what am I looking at? The point is to make you look at all the sections and try to come up with the image. Rather than conveying the image, rather than trying to make an image which looks like something, you're making the subject work to construct the image. In this case, all of this art is used as the painting is used as a vehicle for the technique rather than the technique being used to create an effect. This is something that's very prevalent in modern art, and it's something that you see also in postmodern art. But by the time we get to the postmodern, which is going to be like Jackson Pollock, you end up with something like this. This has no meaning, and it's intended to have no meaning. So when Jackson Pollock throws a bunch of garbage on the canvas, maybe he feels anger, and it's supposed to it comes out of his anger, or it comes out of his grief, or it comes out of some other emotion that everybody feels emotions. By the time we get to this, the whole point is the subject, the person seeing this in an art gallery, impresses their own meaning upon it. They open themselves up to trying to figure out what it means to them. What does this mean? Personally, I do not like abstract art because of this reason. It comes from a nihilist perspective. It's a destruction of meaning. It's an inversion of meaning. It's not an inversion of meaning. Let me take that back. It's a destruction of meaning. The point is to do away with an idea that there's an artistic intent which communicates something to another person. Just like language. I'm using language and I'm using words, and you know what the words mean, hence you understand what I'm saying. We have this medium between us called language. Art is also a medium, and we understand art between ourselves. It's intended to communicate things on a bunch of different levels that are more than just the words that we're saying. So when we see art like this, what we're really dealing with is the rebellion against the idea of there being a layer of meaning between us that we can both understand. This is one of the things I came out with this video about on Newspeak and stuff. I'm like, words have fixed meaning. They have fixed meaning because you understand what I'm saying. They don't have variable meaning that anyone can decide what they mean. The medium between us is fixed. Even if the way words are used over time, it can change a little bit, right? But the fact that there's this language out there that's not up to us. We don't get to decide what language means. Language exists independent of us, and we merely use it to communicate. Art is in a lot of ways the same. And art that's the same, the best way to look at it is music. And I'm going to give you some musical examples in just a second. The last example I'm going to give you is as a comic artist, right? And I'm going to pull up some other images here too in just a second while you guys are looking at Rob Liefeld here. So Rob Liefeld is somewhat infamous. And he's infamous for a very particular kind of art style that became popular in the 90s. It's all about the style, and it's all about the comic being a vehicle for the art rather than the art being used to tell a story. Let me see if I can look up some other stuff. I'm going to look up some John Buscema. Actually, I think he's a great example. You know, my friend of mine, if you're not subscribed to his channel, Jesse White, he likes John Buscema a lot, and he's basically taught me how to have greater appreciation for John Buscema's art. John Buscema is a better technical artist than Rob Liefeld. We're going to compare these two guys. I know we're going far afield from writing, but it's all the same ideas. And in fact, the writing suffers in Rob Liefeld's comics, not just because he views the comic as a medium for his art, and he's actually not a bad writer, by the way. I don't think Rob Liefeld's a bad writer. That's why he's very popular and continues to get work. Like here's a really infamous Rob Liefeld image, this super jacked giant Captain America that's intended to look like Dorian Yates. If you guys don't know who Dorian Yates was, he was a 6-time Mr. Olympia in the 90s. Was the first mass monster bodybuilder. He was absolutely colossal. So you see these great images. They are technically imperfect compared to the art of John Buscema. Let's see if we can find a similar pose from Savage Sword of Conan or something like that. John Buscema's art is technically, very good. right? So here's Conan riding a horse. We see that his arm represents the technically correct way the arm would work. The perspective is correct on his arm. When we look at Rob, the perspective is off. We see that this sword is coming out at the wrong angle for his hand. His feet are obscured. That's all a joke that Rob can't draw feet. I think he actually can, but because of the perspective he draws it in, he just avoids the feet. They're not a thing. Look how giant the thighs are. All those pouches. This is an example of the style overcoming any sense of the art trying to represent the thing itself. Whereas John Buscema's art in Savage Sword of Conan, if you look at Jesse White's channel, he goes through these comics kind of in big detail, and he has an artist's eye for this kind of thing. So he does a great job being able to analyze this. You'll notice that there's far fewer lines. They're far more accurate. And if you look at them within a page, Savage Sword of Conan, the old ones, they're some of my favorite fantasy comics. Let's look at a panel here. I'll just pick one out at random. And hopefully you guys can see this on the screen here. I might zoom it in a little bit. So this is the Xerox of the actual penciled page, which is great. You see that the art is there to allow this to tell the story. Here he is dropping the woman. Here he is riding away from her. We skip all the action in between because it's not necessary. Here he is alone, several miles from the strange little hamlet. His horse falls. You're showing the action. Then you're showing the consequence. There's the woman again. So right in this one panel, we have a story. Gladly. Now, if you're satisfied with that, I'm indeed flesh and blood. I'll take my leave of both of you and your little village. Farewell, little honeybee. Mind who you sting in the future. But several miles from the strange little hamlet. Curious, where did all the men go? Perhaps I was a trifle hasty. That girl may need help now that she's all alone. See, he leaves, he second guesses, besides which she had a delightfully right pair of, and we don't say breasts because it's impolite to say so. Whoops, his horse falls. There she is having a laugh at Conan. So we have a little story in one page where Conan is kind of getting bested here. Whereas if we were to look at any of the Cable comics, you'd see that it's all like poses. And this is something that Shooter complained about, who was Jim Shooter, who was in charge of Marvel, is that all the comics are full of poses rather than full of storytelling. So this is an interesting idea. The comic book is a vehicle for the art itself, a vehicle for the medium. It's a modern idea. So what you're looking at is the modern idea kind of applied to comics. The other thing is it's all about style rather than about some substance or the meaning behind it. What's the meaning behind this crazy picture of Deadpool and Cable? I don't know. It's just meant to look cool. It's meant to be the medium itself. It's an interesting thing to think about. Let's listen to some music. You guys ready to listen to some music? Let me look at the chat, and then we'll listen to some music together. Okay? Let's see here. Aesop's Fables. Yep, we talked about that. Let's see here. Modern art to me seems to have callbacks to ancient art, with the shapes creating the image like cave drawing. The cave sometimes creates the drawing. Postmodern art has no meaning. So now here's the thing. If I look at Cubism again, so if we look at ancient cave things, you're looking at an abstraction of what's there. So in the same way with Cubism, you are looking at an abstraction of reality. You're not trying to convey the thing itself. So those things have in common. But in this case, Cubism is a style layer on top of that, and I think you see that with some other modern art too. Okay, postmodern has no meaning. I think that's accurate, Adon. Yes. Robert Valley's art is another great example. He did Tron Uprising and Zima Blue. Yeah. Do you think, let's see, all this stuff's off topic, so I'll get to it later. Postmodern storytelling sounds evil and satanic. It's like you look at a beautiful art storytelling and deliberately try to destroy it, a hatred of goodness. In a way, satanic, keep in mind, Satanism, I'm not convinced Satanism and nihilism are one and the same. Maybe they are. But usually when we're talking about Satanism, we're talking about an inversion of what's there rather than destroying the meaning. Though destroying the meaning can be evil too. So maybe it's an inversion of the idea of meaning, in which case I think you're correct, Bob. But usually what you'd see is when I think something is actually like a satanic inversion, there's a series on that's like from the devil's perspective, and the devil's a good guy. Well, that's an inversion of reality. That's an inversion of truth as far as the Christian perspective goes. If you're an atheist, obviously you don't believe the devil exists, but that's still a satanic inversion. Let's see if there's anything else. I don't think that altruism is political. Ayn Rand would disagree. Almost everyone believes in altruism. The political debate is over how it's best executed. Politicization doesn't equal inherent political nature. I'd say Ayn Rand would disagree. But you're correct, though, that almost everyone believes in altruism on some level. The political debate is about how it's best executed. So I think you're correct on that, right? So like the conservative or the right-wing perspective is charity's best done voluntarily through charitable private organizations, whereas the left-wing perspective is the state is responsible. Because we have the power of the state, we must use it to perform altruistic deeds. But there's people who don't believe altruism is anything, right? So Ayn Rand would look at the Spider-Man story, that's why I brought her up, and be like, well, how is he going to have his virtuous selfishness or whatever it's going to be? 1984 is a good film. I think the director said they altered some things. I'll have to go back and look at it. I mostly think of the book. Stanley said that when he put messages in his comics, he based them on general moral concepts like the Golden Rule and avoided endorsing specific political parties. Yeah, I think that's correct. But keep in mind, what we consider political is also somewhat a function of time. I think probably in 100 years, we'll look back on people who are pro-abortion the way we look back on people who are pro-slavery. I think morally we'll eventually discard this idea that we can kill children in the womb. So I think that's something that you have to keep in mind. That which is politically controversial 100 years ago is not politically controversial now. What's politically controversial now wasn't controversial 100 years ago. Same thing. So if you look at, how should I put this? So the moral lessons in Spider-Man might have actually been contentious in the 18th century, but they just became kind of they're within the Overton window, right? That's why there's no such thing as political. It's how close to the center you're being political. And I think in general, Marvel Comics are pretty neutral. And that's not a bad thing. That's them knowing that their audience didn't want controversial politics in there. They wanted the acceptable lines of moral reasoning, the acceptable moral points to make them think, rather than ones that are really extreme. Yeah, I wrote a parable of the goat and the sheep, or the fable of the goat and the sheep, which is really just, if you guys want the meaning behind it, it's that people who are highly rebellious think that they somehow end up with a different fate from the people who aren't rebellious, when in reality they both go to the same place. That the goat who resists is not necessarily in a better state than the sheep who submits. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't rebel ever. It's just the people who think of themselves as better for being so aren't usually in a better state. I like that the ring couldn't corrupt Samwise because he was too humble. I mean, it probably would have if he held on to it long enough. Would you consider getting Thomas Roylop from SWC for your new interview series? I consider anyone. I'm not really familiar with him, though. Let's see here. Okay, so let's listen to some music, and this will convey some things. So I'm gonna play a song here off of YouTube. That's from. Let's see here. Where is it? All right, we're gonna compare two things. So first thing we're gonna look at is the post-romantic, or the ending of the 19th century. We're gonna listen to some Gustav Holst. Now, if you have never listened to Gustav Holst and you are a composer, or you'd like to be a film composer, especially, Gustav Holst is basically it. You listen to the Planet Suite, you're going to hear things from all kinds of different film scores, if you want to write good film scores that people understand. So let's see here. Let's jump ahead here. You guys like Morrowind, right? I hope you guys like... Let's turn this up. A little quiet. Let's get to the... Now, there's no words to this, but as you listen to this, you're going to be experiencing meaning. It's fine. Guarantee you're going to hear this theme in a movie somewhere. Now, there's no words here, but you are going to be experiencing emotions, and you're going to be getting meaning from this. This is a beautiful piece. This is my favorite movement of the planets, by the way. This should feel like satisfying. You might feel happiness, a certain amount of pleasure from this. A bit of nostalgia, like you're remembering something that you like. For me, part of that nostalgia is very similar to the music from Morrowind. In fact, music from Morrowind is nearly a ripoff of this. Yeah, John Williams took Holst. Everyone takes Holst, dude. Metallica takes Holst. It's not a big deal, man. He's the master of programmatic music, which is music which conveys the meaning and the feelings directly without you having to add a whole bunch of extra words. So programmatic music became big in the 19th century. This idea of conveying specific meaning using just the music. Now, I'm going to continue to talk here. I'm going to turn down just a little bit for you guys as I lecture. So here's the thing. I don't want to get too deep into music theory, but all of the building blocks of music theory are built into your neurology. So in other words, you don't have to learn a language in order to know the meaning behind this piece of music. The meaning is obvious from its inception. In other words, it's built into your being. You were created to understand music. Your experience of music is your neurology. More than your neurology, but we'll do it on a purely materialistic level. It's your neurology responding to mathematical relationships between pitches over time. That's the essence of what music is. So music theory is codifying how those things work and creating a system that you can use to then create music that's going to convey that meaning and have those effects. I have like a 10 or 12 part basic intro to music theory here on YouTube you can look up to get a deeper understanding of how that works. But all you need to know is that it's not subjective. The tonal system is absolutely not subjective. It's based off of mathematical relationships which exist in nature, which your neurology is programmed to respond to. It is designed to respond to it, and it exists in our speech. You actually speak in perfect intervals. Da-da-da-da-da. Right? So when you speak, you're actually singing a melody. A lot of you probably did not realize this, but you are. So when somebody has some sort of speech issue like amusia, where they talk in a monotone or they just start picking random pitches, that's broken. It doesn't feel natural to us. Each language uses this in different ways. So Chinese is a tonal language where like ni hao doesn't convey the same meaning as like ni hao. Right? There's a pitch change that's part of the meaning. Holst and his contemporaries, Rimsky-Korsakov and even Stravinsky to a certain extent, but Stravinsky's thoroughly modern, were kind of the last Richard Strauss. Even Johann Strauss, but Richard Strauss. These are the last guys to use what's called common practice music theory in the realm of orchestra and art music. After this, it fell out of fashion, and with it fell out, people stopped wanting to really listen to a lot of orchestra music. Pop music continued to use music theory, real music theory. And what it's replaced by in the modern period is an artificial invention of music theory. So I'm going to let you guys hear this guy right here. This is Arnold Schoenberg. I actually like Schoenberg's music, but probably for the same reason that I might like Ulysses, which is that it's technically interesting. So 12-tone music, let's listen to it. So, you guys are probably not thinking this is particularly beautiful. Let's see if I can find something more extreme.
I cannot remember everything.
Oh, here's the narration.
Must have been unconscious most of the time. I remember only the grandiose moments when they all started to sing as if...
Now, in the eclectic period, which John Williams uses the 12-tone technique that Schoenberg invented. In fact, he doesn't really use it very much, but I mean, he uses atonalism. Atonalism is what we're looking at here, which is the idea of getting away from tonal harmony. Tonal harmony exists in nature. It's a function of nature. It's built into your neurology. Atonalism is a rebellion against it and an attempt to destroy it. So the way Schoenberg did this is he replaced it with his own invented music theory called 12-tone technique, in which you take all 12 notes of the keyboard, which actually don't represent 12 real notes in nature. You can see my music theory series if you want a deeper explanation of this. The 12 notes on the keyboard, I'm touching my keyboard right now, they're a adjusted, equal tempered altering of what nature produces. But he decided to take those and he codified them so that no pitch would be used more often than others is the goal of it. And it creates a completely controlled sound of dissonance. There's no consonance and no dissonance changes, which is how music normally works. And the end result is something that's quite strange, as you guys can hear.
Prearranged the old prayer they had neglected for so many years.
Let's try some Milton Babbitt. This is actually a piece of modern, not necessarily postmodern art, but this is postmodern music. Beautiful, huh? Aren't you guys feeling such great feelings of nostalgia and joy like with Holst? Or are you feeling just a sense of fear because your brain doesn't know how to respond to these relationships? This is what's called serial music, okay? So the whole idea of serial music is rather than... You guys hear this? I hate this guy's music so much. Such garbage. So people are going to be like, it sounds like random notes. Well, it's intended to be random notes. Turn down a little bit. So the idea of serial music is you use some mathematical sequence to determine the elements of music and how they occur, rather than using them with intent. So the idea of an artist having a set of tools that he's using and intending to convey meaning or affect an audience member in some way, it's divorced. So again, in the postmodern here, we have a complete elimination of any kind of idea of intent towards the audience. It's gone. It's not there. It just doesn't exist there. It's a very, very interesting set of sounds, right? I don't know if you guys agree. You can see my recommended videos here are all like lazy game reviews today for some reason. I watched a couple of these videos. So you want more of these. I love the algorithm. Who doesn't love the algorithm? Okay. So the algorithm, you could use an algorithm to compose this music. Hopefully people are like, make it stop. Okay, we'll make it stop. Let's go back. Let's put on some Holst. It's beautiful. Scratching at my door sound. You guys can hear the contrast. So this... Alright, so the whole point of this is that as you go and as things develop, rather than styles coming in and out, what you have is a replacement of the whole idea of something being a vehicle for meaning. Like this is supposed to be about particular emotions. And it's a vehicle for some stylistic idea, like here's my 12-tone technique I invented, or until the postmodern you get it where it's like the meaning is completely subjective and up to the person listening to it. which basically means there is no inherent meaning. There's no artistic intent. And once you remove artistic intent from it, you're lost art. There's no more art. This is the problem with the Academy. Is the Academy has been it's now 100 years since we've had any kind of major composer coming out of the Academy that makes music that anyone gives a shit about. Instead, all of the good music that's for orchestra is movie scores. So in 100 years, the composition students, after this trend is long dead, they're going to be studying John Williams and James Horner, and maybe even electronic artists like, I don't know, like Philip Glass, rather than anyone from the Academy. They're not going to be listening to any of this. They're not going to be listening to Milton Babbitt. It's going to be a historical footnote of, here's what serial music sounded like. And they'd be like, well, that sounds awful. Why did people listen to this? And it's like, we're looking at the numbers, and historically they didn't. They didn't listen to it, guys. So anyway, that's part of it. Okay, I just realized you probably weren't seeing the screen I wanted you to see, because it was like, here's all my suggested lazy game reviews. You liked this lazy game review video, and then below it, oh, I guess you like classical music too. And like, you're impossible to figure out, David Stewart. We don't know what to give you. Eric Satie, that's one of the last ones too. Satie and Debussy with impressionist music, one of the last gasps of good music here. So anyway, that's my point about postmodernism. Hopefully you can hear that. So when we see this with literature, the whole point that I'm kind of coming around to here is, one of the reasons that there's so much crap out there is that people are specifically avoiding doing things which they know will actually be good and that people will actually like. So as a story writer, regardless of what medium you're in, if you're in comics, if you're in novels, if you're in movies, if you're in video games, the point is, if you have something that you want to say in there, you can have that meaning. But all the techniques that you have are tools for you to convey that meaning to an audience member. You're acting with artistic intent if you're using those tools, rather than looking at those as something else. So if you're operating completely as within this realm of trying to produce style, it's not going to end up being persistent and being loved. There's more examples in music, even within popular music. As jazz music began to decline, you had this effect where you had albums that were entirely about producing crazy technique or doing really weird things or pushing the envelope, and rather than trying to make music people liked. Miles Davis always pushed the envelope, and as a result, some of his music is not near to unlistenable. You saw this, you could see this with metal. You have, some people call it like, micro riff stuff like Meshuggah. Your average person will find that unlistenable because it's just harsh noise that's like an intellectual exercise in combining different rhythms together, rather than an attempt to make something beautiful and interesting or just moving or exhilarating. So as art forms mature, they tend to go through these cycles. That's the other thing I want to get through. So anyway, thanks so much for listening to that lecture. Hopefully it makes sense to you, this difference between the modern and the postmodern. Let's take a look at the chat before we go off here. We got about 20 minutes left. Time to switch to tea. Crazy Chameleon at the bottom here. Disaster Piece is another great composer who started out composing music for video games and moved to movies. I'm actually a big fan of his. If you haven't heard Disaster Piece, he writes chiptune music, he writes electronic music, but he uses the tools to convey meaning and have effect. He doesn't approach it. He might be eclectic, but he doesn't approach it from a postmodern perspective at all. His music's quite good, so I do like Disaster Piece. I know you're a fan of power metal. Do you like symphonic metal? Symphonic metal is a subgenre of power metal, so yes. Don't let anyone tell you differently. There might be symphonic black metal, like Dimmu Borgir, but yeah, most symphonic metal is just a subgenre of power metal. Just like how Twilight Force calls themselves adventure metal. It's power metal, guys. It's great. If you haven't heard the new Twilight Force album, it's great. I'm going to try to put out a video on it next Monday. There's a lot to dig into. Same thing with the second album. The second album is amazing. So if you haven't heard Heroes of Mighty Magic, it's one of the best power metal albums you will ever hear. It's great. Eric Wolfgang Korngold. Yeah, I think he did old stuff. I haven't studied that. I almost never. By the way, guys, I don't listen to scores apart from movies because I think they go with the art. It's one whole piece of art. Is how I look at it. So I very rarely listen to scores outside of movies. I know some of you like to do that. That's not what I like to do. I like to listen to things that are created specifically for music. So most of the classical music I listen to is from the 19th century and before. Let's see if there's any stuff I missed here. Let's see here. Do you think that the Doctor Strange movie promotes the occult? I don't know. I think the occult is... Nah, I don't really think so. I think that's just a vehicle for their little world building thing. MCU Spider-Man gets Peter Parker entirely wrong. Gets the setting wrong. Aunt May isn't sexy. Flash Thompson isn't a nerd. Mary Jane isn't a pseudo-goth. Absolutely. I agree. But, it's corporate fan fiction, so it's just their interpretation of it. Don't get mad that they pee on something that another artist did. That's just how it is. They have the legal ability to destroy whatever they want to at this point. I've been watching Spider-Man in the animated series from the 90s, and Peter is there exactly like you explained. Cheeky, but not a comedian. Yeah, that's part of his charm, I think. And it's there in the comics. Could be part of the reason for the success of movies like new versions of The Lion King. Anti-animation snobbery. I view animation as inferior or for kids. That's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. So I hadn't really considered that perspective at all. Because I don't have it sometimes. So this is a thing about your biases. If I don't think that, when somebody else says that, I'm like, well, that's dumb because that's not true. But I can see how other people could do that because especially in America, I mean, not just in America, but we always view animation as for kids because it's such an abstraction of what's there. It's such a softening of reality, but I don't think so at all. Did you see that your excellent Bolshevik marketing video was featured on Breitbart News? Yes, some people pointed that out to me. I tweeted that out. I was like, that's cool. I appreciate that. You think time travel gives Star Wars too many easy solutions? What about the fact that lightspeed rams are now the single most affordable and easy to use weapon of mass destruction in the galaxy? Yep, there you go. Or why don't we just warp speed through the shield? They just did that so it's kind of it's bad story algebra. If you look at episode 7, they're writing it as they go. They come up with an obvious obstacle and they just invent something to get through it. It's like, how are we going to know how to blow up this new Death Star? And it's like, I was a janitor that worked on it, so therefore I know how. Okay, great. Because we got to finish this movie up in the next 20 minutes, guys. We're coming up to the end and we didn't think about the plot at all. All right, how are we going to get through the shields? Because, of course, they have deflector shields. How are we getting through the deflector shields? How about we jargon, light speed through the shields and stop right before we hit the ground? Like, in this world where there's no such thing as, I guess, you'd still have all kinds of inertia traveling forward. Anyway, it's like, we'll just do that. No, they've never done that before. We'll just do that. And we'll land 3 guys. It's like, okay, if we can all go light speed through the deflector shields, how about everybody just does that right now? It's like, no, just the Millennium Falcon, bro. Oh, I need to get out of this chair. We need to get Rey out of this chair. Jedi mind trick. It's like, but she's never seen that. No one cares, dude. No one cares, man. It's Star Wars. Anyway, yeah, sorry for the rant. Amazing Spider-Man movies were actually pretty good. Andrew Garfield is probably the best actor to play Spider-Man. I haven't watched him. I should probably watch him. A Stephen King book where the main character goes back in time. I haven't read that one. I've read a lot of Stephen King books, but not that one. I guess I missed it. The last Stephen King book I read was Doom McKee, so I haven't read one in a while. I don't think Andrew Garfield gave a bad performance. Okay, yeah. A few people have started calling all action heroines, even Black Widow and Wonder Woman, masculine by virtue of their combat lifestyle. Do you think there's a good counter-argument? It depends. A lot of them are just what I call trouser rolls. A trouser roll really is it's an opera term where you don't castrate boys anymore. So you have a woman play the part of a castrati and wear a fake beard. It's called trouser roll. Do you like Brahms? Yes. Have you read Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy? No, I haven't. So I like Brahms a lot. I think he's a great romantic period composer. He's a great place to start with if you like orchestral music that's programmatic and highly memorable. I think he's a great example of the 19th century composers that none of his pieces are over full. Like if you listen to someone like Berlioz, there can be too much material in one movement. But I never feel that with Brahms. So I think Brahms is a great place to start with 19th century music. Anyway, going back to this idea of trouser rolls, that's the question is how is it actually a female perspective? Because I have a female kind of action protagonist in Water of Awakening, right? And I don't think this is a trouser roll for her. She's feminine to me, and she has feminine virtues or female virtues, and thinks is how I imagine a woman would think in her predicament. She's acting for her family. She has crisis over the possible removal of family, and she cares about her husband. She cares about her village. I don't know. Oh, by the way, thanks for the super chat. I forgot to say thank you, Contrarian. I appreciate the super chat a lot. So it depends. Like there's this moment in Avengers where Black Widow expresses regret over not being able to have kids. I don't know if it's like part of what they did to her or if it's their lifestyle. And feminists got super mad. They're like, we're more than just vessels for babies. I'm like, but having children is something men cannot do. It's an essentially female experience. And so the idea of a woman expressing some regret over missing out on something that is essential to her being, that's cannot be experienced by anyone that isn't a woman, is I think was very very appropriate. But some people hate that. Some people really hate that. So I think the counter argument to calling them masculine is that masculinity is more than beating people up, right? It's a whole set of things, acting with honor and things like that. Very insightful about Trump. I think his supporters do the same thing. Yeah, they judge his process, not his consequences. I mean, he still hasn't done a lot of the things he said he'd do, right? A lot of people are trying to justify that. They're like, oh, he's playing 4D chess. He's like, no, dude, you gotta criticize where criticism's due. I didn't say anything about Clinton, but economics doesn't just work in consequences. Expectations and uncertainty are very important. Businesses stop investing, for example. Well, I mean, economics is you're figuring out the process by viewing the consequences. So you're getting your data from endpoints. You're not watching somebody think about decisions in mass. You're seeing what they do, and so you're generating your models based on conclusions. It's the same thing. It'd be like if one of the problems with some economic theories is you come up with a theory and then it's people are bad when things don't adhere to your theory, right? Rather than starting with the data and coming up with a model that works to fulfill the requirements of that data and works in the future as well. So the thing about economics is that if it's predictive, it's correct. But there's a lot of economic theories out there now that I just think aren't predictive at all. A lot of macroeconomists, a lot of macroeconomists make all these predictions that just never happen. They're completely bonkers. They have some idea for what's supposed to happen, but they're unable to make accurate predictions. A good one is actually Peter Schiff. Peter Schiff is constantly like, Bitcoin's going to fall to zero. Gold is going to go up. The economy is a zombie. The economy is going to crash. Like sooner or later, yeah, economies have downturns. But like the doomsaying never seems to come about. And likewise, you have people on the other side that's like, the economy's going to boom if they do this, and they do it, and then it doesn't happen, which means that you're just not operating with an accurate model. Your model's just not predicting the future. So yeah, it doesn't just work in consequences, but if the consequences don't match the model, then the model's wrong. A lot of people forget this stuff. This is why, global warming, it's like global warming scientists have these great models. It's like if they haven't accurately predicted temperatures, then the model has to get thrown out or you have to revise it. So wait till you have a model that actually predicts the future. Things which aren't predictive aren't useful. About the Raimi Spider-Man again, I think many people underestimate their thematic depth and the execution thereof. Yeah. Okay. So the High Top Films channel maybe has some good explorations of them. I could probably stand to rewatch them. Getting into your work and really digging, man. You kick ass. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. What's your opinion on climate change? Oh, I just said it. I don't. So it's not that I think climate change is real or unreal. I don't believe climatologists because they don't predict the future. So once they're capable of predicting the future, then I'll listen to them. But the reality is they come at a long, long line of people attempting to predict climatary futures that have all been wrong. So it's like if somebody goes into a casino, I think they were right 1 year out of 20, which is might be random or worse than random. I don't know. It's like going into a casino and someone's like, I'm going to predict what cards are going to come up in this blackjack game. And they're wrong. And they're finally right one time. And they're like, see, now you have to, now you need to listen to me. And it's like, no, you're just consistently wrong. And one time you guessed right. That doesn't make you correct. You have to be consistently correct about things. So, I just judge the consequences, right? At one point in time, I was more into all of the science and trying to figure out if it was true or not. But you don't really need to go that far. If you just look at the outcomes, if they're not correctly predicting the weather, then the model doesn't work. Meteorologists have a difficult time predicting the weather 5 days from now. How do you think people are going to be predicting global weather 20 years from now? It's going to be hard. It's going to be a very hard thing to do. It's going to take a while before you figure out how to predict the weather because we've never really been able to predict it well other than during the season, there's more rain. And during that season, there's usually less rain. But then it rains sometimes on summer and you can't predict that. Sorry, the world's full of randomness. So yeah, I'm critical of climate change simply because it's not convincing. You can't, if you're not predicting anything, then the model doesn't work. Do you think movies that are continuations of video games as sequels could work? I don't know. I have no idea. I have never considered that, Darkspawn. So there you go. I can't answer it. With the current narrative in publishing, do you have any thoughts on how to handle criticisms on writers writing outside of their race, gender, etc.? Block and move on is the best thing, if you can do that. So block and move on. I haven't gotten significant criticism for writing Japanese historical fiction. My main response would be, if someone's like, hey, you're not Japanese, you can't write samurai novels. My response would probably be, well, you are not from the Sengoku period of feudal Japan. So neither one of us really has a correct perspective on the culture of Japan 500 years ago, right? The culture of Japan today is not the culture of Japan 500 years ago, just like the culture of England. It's not the culture of England 500 years ago. So somebody saying you can't write something set in England because you're not English. It's like, well, it's set in 1200s England. Neither one of us is from 1200s England. So neither one of us can really complain. And then you just block them, right? There's people who are going to hate on you, man. Just it's really not worth your time, especially if you're a little guy. People who are going to criticize that, they're not going to buy your books, so there's no reason to engage with them or even care about anything they say. The idea of orphans gives sympathy. Yes, I agree. The author says his character is naive. Is he a nihilist? No, not necessarily. Nihilism is usually there's no meaning. You could be naive about how the world works, like thinking people are inherently good or something when they're not inherently good. Not in my opinion or experience. People are not basically good. Did you notice that Spider-Man 2002 has the same ending as The Dark Knight? I didn't. The hero gives up his reputation so a villain can still be seen as a role model by one or more people. I didn't notice that till you said it. Christopher Nolan and Dave Fincher are a few directors who make a lot of original works with a big spectacle like Lucas and Spielberg before them. Yeah. To be fair, I haven't seen the Spider-Man movie in like a long time. But I remember that. He was trying to keep people safe. What is high fashion? I don't know fashion. Let's see here. Answered that. What's your favorite of Aesop's fables? Mine is the man, the boy, and the donkey. I think mine is the dog and the wolf. I might retell that one. You know, the dog's telling the wolf what a great life he has, and then the wolf sees the collar, and he's like, I don't want any part of that. I actually don't know if that's an Aesop's fable or not. But it's a story I remember and like a lot, and I was thinking of rewriting it. Jared Wignall, in Star Wars, Anakin was to bring balance to the Force. He did by killing Palpatine. Luke saw the good in him, yeah. So if the movie scene today is similar to the 1960s, are we just reliving the 60s but with little alterations? Well, the trend is kind of the same, but obviously it's different stories and there's different stuff going on. I'd actually say we might be entering some other realm once this kind of comes crashing down. I don't know what's going to be. It might be completely novel because we didn't have the internet before. The internet is an alternative to movies. Again, right? Video games. Once people have all these alternatives, the old medium tends to take a back seat. Kind of like opera. Opera was the main, like, big, high-class entertainment for a long time until people had alternatives like movies or, you know, stage. People don't go see plays that often anymore because movies are an alternative to that are cheaper. The Beautiful Story of an American Tale. I don't feel like I could talk about that one. Jared says he likes Our Brother, We're Out, though. I like it too. I think it's good. What you're describing with Ulysses sounds so gross. It's like a degeneration of writing as an art form. No longer telling stories, just fancy writing. Yeah, that's what it is, man. That's why literature professors like it, and it's why when I say, like, it's unlikely that a literature degree will teach you what you need to know to write a book, it's because I don't know anyone with a literature degree who learned how to write a book from their literature degree. They mostly learned what stories were popular at a certain time with the academy, and that's it. You don't even get a grasp on what people actually like. Like I said, you'd be looking at stuff like John Carter of Mars, not Ulysses. You'd be looking at pulps because people actually read them. They were so much more influential and everything else too. How do you classify episodic series like Doc Savage and The Shadow in regard to being vehicles? I've never seen it. Postmodern storytelling sounds evil and satanic. Okay, read that. What is the vehicle in The Land Before Time? I mean, the vehicle's the story, but there's probably, I mean, the deeper themes are like, I don't know, family, hope, I don't know. It's just a story. Sometimes they're just stories. The way you described Blue Movie reminded me of Idiocracy, how the number one movie was called Ass, and that's all it was, 90 minutes of it. Andy Warhol also made a movie called Empire that's just a black and white 8-hour and 5-minute long shot of the Empire State Building. There you go. It's like, this is art. It's whatever you want it to be. What are your thoughts on fourth Matrix film that was announced? It's just part of the corporate cycle of IP. It's been dead. Time for a requel. Time to bring it back until it's completely dead, and then we'll reboot it. You got to milk what's good from the past because there's no original ideas. Why not hire the Wachowskis to do something new? I don't know why. Do you think that imagination and creativity are like muscles that can be strengthened by exercising them? Yes. And if so, what are the best exercises? Writing. So writing is a best exercise for prose, but you could just do a bunch of outlining. Whatever art you want to be better at, you just got to do it. Just got to do it. And if you want to think about, there's a bunch of different ways. It's too big a topic. I'll talk about it some other time in more depth. But yes, you can. It's mostly practice. What do you think of H.R. Geiger's organic mechanical art? I'm a big fan of it. I like H.R. Geiger's art a lot. It's extremely interesting. It's extremely original. It's very rare that somebody does something as original and grotesque and cool as him. But I don't know if he's liked in academic circles. He probably isn't. Andy Warhol made a film called Batman Dracula due to him being a fan of Batman, yet it was apparently very campy. I didn't know that. I had no idea about that. Are you familiar with Sir Roger Scruton? He's an English scholar who posits that beauty is of great importance to society and is being destroyed by postmodernism. I'm not familiar with it, but I agree, and it's also something that I thought postmodernism would be done. We're in like a 50-year cycle of this garbage. And the funny thing is, postmodernism destroyed all academic standards of beauty, which is why people who have art degrees can't draw. In fact, I would say now, like, I go and I see, say, an exhibition of a local art department. I used to see this when I was teaching at Fresno State, or when I went to Fresno State. I'd like go and look at the art, and it was garbage. It looked like crap. And then I meet people who are like, I'm debating whether I should get my MA in art, and I'm like, let me see your portfolio, and it's nothing I would look at that and be embarrassed of what's there. Yet they have a bachelor's degree in art. So I'm actually at the point where if somebody has an art degree, right away I'm wanting to select against them just based on my experience. Whereas somebody doesn't, unless they're from the Eastern Bloc. Like if they have an art degree and they're from Georgia or from Moldova, they're probably pretty good. Or from China, if they're from an Asian country, their art degree probably taught them how to do art. Whereas if they're from the West, the capitalist West, no, like they won't know how to do it at all. The meaning isn't there, but the technique isn't there. They don't understand anatomy. It looks like horrible garbage. So it's like if somebody has an art degree, chances are not only did they not learn how to create art, they learned all the opposite things they should. They would have been better off not going and just trying to create art for 4 years. If you had, instead of spending, I challenge anyone who thinks art degrees are the way to go. It's not that you can't get any value out of an art degree, but just consider this. It's going to cost you 50 grand. Let's say it's going to cost you $50,000, 50,000 pounds, 50,000 euros, whatever it's going to be to get an art degree. And it could be for whatever arts, including music. You look at the time you're going to spend at school. You're going to spend 8 hours a day at school, probably more working with other people on projects. If you took that $50,000 and lived frugally for 4 years, and instead of going to class, you just practiced 8 hours a day toward what you wanted to do, read all the books that you could on it, asked great artists who knew how to do it, studied the great works, and tried to duplicate them. If you spent 8 hours a day doing that on your own, do you think you would be better or worse than the people who get the art degree? I think you'd be better. I think you'd be challenged to say that you've somehow gained some extra perspective by listening to a professor tell you how Jackson Pollock's art is good, or like how to create meaningless art. Why is that important? Like you can go to an art history class. I might say take the art history class and skip the rest of it, because obviously the people who are teaching them aren't capable of applying standards to their students, because their students come out not being able to do anything. Anyway. Yeah, I think that's my rant. Modern art from Adon. Yeah, I talked about this. Robert Valley's art. Yeah, talked about that. Gustav Holst is amazing. I love Jupiter and Mars. Jupiter's probably my favorite, but again, I like the fact that the Morrowind music ripped it off. When is episode 5 video coming? Oh, yeah. I'll do those. So I wanted to take a break from doing Star Wars stuff just because I needed a break from it. So I'll do more Star Wars stuff before this next Star Wars movie comes out. So in the next few weeks and months, I'll probably do I'll probably do a new analysis of 4, and then I'll do 5 and 6. Episode 5 and 6. And I'll probably talk about KOTOR 2, which is great. Man, you're making me really lament the condition society is in today with this look back at art. Somebody spammed Costanza. We live in a society. Yeah. Well, there's great art, but it's not what you're going to see at a university. It's not what's promoted as art. It's not what the government pays for. The government pays for crap like Piss Christ or Immersion, which is just a freaking plastic crucifix immersed in a bottle of pee-pee and called art, $15,000 of your dollars paid for that if you live in the United States. It's just as bad, and in Europe, guys. The state funds terrible art. I'd say if you're going to have a hierarchy of good art, the worst art in the world is that which is funded by the state in a capitalist society, or the West. Let's call it. Capitalism really is an economic system from the past at this point, but let's just say the West. So the first world, if the state paid for the art, you're talking about the worst possible art that you'll ever see. Piles of poo-poo called art. Jars of pee-pee called art. Till I have children. Next below that is going to be probably, next above that is probably going to be the socialist art of the past. Socialist art from the past, it has artistic standards, it has intent, it's just propagandistic. It just reflects the desire for the state to control the beliefs of people. So there is an art to the propaganda of the USSR. There is an art to the art that the USSR produced. But if you weren't producing that art, you also weren't producing any art. You weren't allowed to make dissident art in the USSR. So this idea that in socialist countries you were allowed to just make art because there's no capitalist, pushing down on you. No, you'd be in like a mental institution. If you were handing the commissar a pile of poo-poo and calling it art for the glory of the people, he would put you in a mental institution, because you would be insane to think that that's art. Above that would probably be corporate art. So like corporate, your standard corporate IP garbage would be above that. Like, Freddy versus Jason part 13, whatever it's going to be. So that's above that. Then above that, you have people who make art in a free market, but it's original. That's going to be Star Wars, right? Actually, Star Wars is one above this. So that's going to be stuff like Thriller. It's going to be really high quality. And the very best art is art which is made by artists which are unfettered. Unfettered art that's the purest expression of what the author wants to make his art into. So that's going to be stuff like Star Wars, actually. The reason the first Star Wars worked is basically George Lucas was allowed to make the movie he wanted to make. And the result was very good for everyone involved. Made everybody a lot of money, but it also, everybody loved to watch it. You can see this stuff in music. When an artist, in some cases, people like, so a lot of people like Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. It's basically the unfettered Beatles. The Beatles had these unfettered works in the late 60s that are great expressions of where they were at. It's why people love them so much. I'm not huge fans, but it's the highest level of like artistic expression, really. The Time One by Winter Sun or something. Heroes of Mighty Magic by Twilight Force. When I hear something like that, I'm like, this is the dudes doing exactly what they want. Unfettered, high production value. Everything is the top. Everything's the top level of what they can do. They aren't resurrecting a dead corpse of some previous artist like with corporate art. They aren't highly restricted by budget because it's a limited product. It's really hard to have a movie that's unfettered in any way. It just is. It's almost impossible because there's so much stuff there. Okay, people talking about Gustav Holst. It's great. Have you heard the Lord of the Rings Symphony by Johann de Mage? Yes, I've played it. I have played it before as a clarinetist. It's great. Whispering Winds from Land Before Time. I can't look that up without this video being demonetized or being taken off YouTube, which it probably will be. Everything's looking good. Okay, we're out of time. Let me quickly finish up. Song of India by Rimsky-Korsakov. I like it. I like Scheherazade better. I like Rimsky-Korsakov a lot though. Feels creepy. I guess we're talking about Schoenberg. Are you a Dura fan? I don't think I am. Fan of Brahms, yes. You said that pop music continued to use music theory after some other forms of music stopped doing so. Do you think that ABBA used it particularly well? Yeah, ABBA did fine. Most pop music did. Jazz continued to develop its own stylistic use of what's called common practice music theory. This is music theory that's based on the natural way that sound works, rather than artificial music theory such as serialism or 12-tone technique or atonalism. What do you think of noise rap? I don't know what it is. Is it called serial music because it comes from the mind of a serial killer? No, just from a nihilist. But same thing, possibly. Possibly if Milton Babbitt wasn't making garbage music, he might have killed people. What about playing some Edgar Varese? Yeah, it's great. Yeah, it's all good stuff. The algorithm's fantastic. Are you a fan of Eric Wolfgang Korngold or Max Steiner? Yes, Max Steiner. Let's see here. I lost a bunch of chat all of a sudden. Sorry. I'm trying to go really quickly through this. Let's see here. Power metal. Yes, I love power metal. Current narrative in publishing. We talked about that. Thomas Roylup is a comic book writer. Okay, have him send me an email. I don't know about him yet. I probably haven't connected with him. I am going to read further up the chat. I just did that. Trying to go back down. Try to get all the chat. What's your favorite prequel? Episode... So I have 3 favorite prequels. So my favorite prequel to watch with my son is episode 1. He really likes it. It's great for kids. Jar Jar's funny for kids. My favorite prequel in terms of artistic expression is episode 3. The one that feels the most like Star Wars is episode 2. If I look back, episode 2 is the one that for whatever reason, I enjoy it more than the others. It just feels right. It feels like the Star Wars movie I wanted as a kid. What's the most important part to get right when writing a thriller? When writing thriller? I don't know. Probably maintaining tension. Do you have a favorite composer? Bach. Bach, in general, for lute, it's probably Sylvius Weiss. For 19th century stuff, it's probably Holster Wagner. 20th century stuff, it's definitely Percy Grainger. But there's a reason Percy Granger is my favorite 20th century dude. It's because he didn't do this atonal stuff. He did new versions of folk songs and made them awesome. Made them just super exciting and fun. Top 5 classical composers. Let's add a couple other to that. Beethoven. Beethoven's the king, man. He created the romantic style just out of his pure passion. That's why Beethoven's top level. It's unfettered art. He had the money, he had the time, he could just do the art that he wanted to do. It was perfect for what it was. It was his perfect expression. I love it. Let's see here. Loved Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Maybe I'll get around to watching it. We'll see. Album Quark by Jun Fukumachi. I haven't heard it, so maybe I'll check it out. Quark. You say it's fan fiction, so we shouldn't get mad, but I'm mad that the resources are being wasted. Great point, Bob. Those resources could pay for something original. You have an excellent point. That also kind of upsets me. Because the remake, that's $200 million that could have been spent on something cool. When writing a story, do you use a mind map? I don't know what a mind map is, I think. Sorry. Is it necessary to create a relatable antagonist? No. The best antagonists are usually distant and scary, like Iran or Sauron or... I think it was a mistake to try to make Thanos too relatable, too. Force Awakens is garbage. I can't believe people still defend it. I can believe it. Psychic investment, man. Fans get psychically invested in these IPs. People have an identity of Star Wars fan. People have an identity of metalhead or something, and so they get defensive about it. You don't like heavy metal, that's fine. There's tons of other music for you to listen to that's awesome. You don't have to listen to heavy metal, but I'm going to talk about it with people who like metal. It seems like deflector shields have been rendered mute by Disney. Yeah. What's your opinion on climate change? Got that. Hearing about Sony stealing Spider-Man back from Disney and not giving it back seems funny to me. I like the idea of that, but I don't think that's what's happening. Black Widow in the movies was sterilized. Okay. that makes sense. The backlash against Black Widow scene was largely due to how badly written it was. She called herself a monster for being sterile in a clumsily written way. I didn't pick that up. I didn't think so. So I don't think it was badly written. Why do people still defend The Force Awakens? It baffles me. I explained that. Right when you said you can't predict the weather, I got a tornado warning on my phone. So you can predict it, but you're predicting something that's happening right now. Like or 10 minutes away or tomorrow. Like you see the clouds coming, you're like, there's going to be rain tomorrow. Pretty good. Or you can predict it from the wind. We're talking about predicting global weather decades in advance. There's so many more variables, my God. And it's like your work's cut out for you if you're trying to do that. So in other words, politics in art isn't the problem. It's propaganda, right? I think it's the subversion. I don't think politics is the problem. I think they're just not upfront with it. Any plans to watch Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? Eventually, I'm sure I'll watch it. I don't think I'll watch it in theaters. I just don't have time. Are you considering doing a D&D streams? I'm considering lots of things. So a game stream or a D&D stream. I know I want to stream some Vanilla WoW. So I want to get my friends in on that. And you can laugh at how nerdy we are. My black friends want more characters on TV and films that are black. Is wanting to watch movies where the characters look like you as a product of the culture war or a valid preference? I don't think it's an invalid preference at all. I mean, preferences are what they are. I think where we probably are going to have conflict is you take a previously established white character and make him black rather than making a new black character that's just black, that's part of his identity. You're putting a fake identity onto something else. So I don't think it's wrong to like have a black identity or to want to see representations of an identity that's similar to yours. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think what's wrong is to replace something which already has a set identity. And I kind of talked about this in a video, but that's my short version. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I know Bill Cosby wanted representations of black culture that were not negative. Whatever you think about Bill Cosby, doesn't matter. He wanted positive visualization of the black family. And I can understand that as well. People today see the Force as yin yang, but I always thought of the dark side was supposed to be a cancerous, toxic thing. Oh, yeah, that's a good point, Bob. Yeah, I think that is. I think yin yang maybe developed a little bit later. I always thought the dark side was more like. Yeah, I probably think of it more as yin yang. Is it inevitable to try and stop change, or does nothing really change? There's nothing new under the sun. So things are cyclical, is how I view it. Things come back around again. The Wachowskis did something new. It's called Jupiter Ascending and featured Elf Dog, Channing Tatum, and Whisper villain Eddie Raymond. And see, I didn't watch it. Of course, I'm a bad guy who didn't watch it. Sorry. Maybe I'll watch it. My question about what you think of episodic series pulps as vehicles was about pulp novel series. Oh, okay. It wasn't about TV shows. I'm sorry. I think pulp novel series are fine. I don't like detective. I'm not the market who reads detective novels. I like fantasy novel series, but it depends, because I like Conan. I like a lot of that stuff. I think it's fine. I think they're fine vehicles for what's in them too, because they can be more episodic rather than like continuing through it. So Conan stories, I like a lot. What are your opinions on Bernard Shaw's works, such as Pygmalion and Saint Joan? I don't think I'm equipped to answer that question. Any thoughts on Star Wars Galaxy's Edge underperforming? I don't think it's okay. So yeah, let me answer this question. I know we're out of time, but so there's this narrative that Star Wars Galaxy's Edge is underperforming. But it can't underperform because it's a joint product. That's like saying Bell telephones are underperforming. Bell telephones are produced jointly with telephone service. Or maybe, it's like saying, people aren't buying new cell phones. Well, cell phones are produced jointly with service. It's a joint product. You don't buy entry into the Star Wars land. You buy entry into Disneyland, and Star Wars Land goes along with that. Now, I was an annual pass holder at Disneyland for a number of years, so don't think I don't know what I'm talking about when I talk about this stuff. I know a lot about Disneyland. I've spend a lot of time at Disneyland. We live far enough away that we don't have annual passes. But if I still lived in LA, I'd probably still have an annual pass because it's actually very economical entertainment when you actually do the math for it, which we did. It was like $100 a month. And if you go there once a month, it pays for itself. You can just go there. If you live there, you can just go there in an afternoon and like, let's go ride Splash Mountain. It's great. So what you have to understand is you cannot divorce Galaxy's Edge popularity from the popularity of the park in total. Now, a couple of things happened. They raised the price of the annual passes, and they raised the price of general park admission. So those two things by themselves, you're talking about supply and demand and pricing. So if you raise the price, it's going to lower demand. You want to have the price be as high as possible with demand as high as possible and figure out where those things are going to cross so that you make the most money. Like if you charge $10 more and it doesn't lower demand, you want to keep up charging. Now, I think part of the reason they raised that rate was Star Wars Land. This idea that the Galaxy's Edge in Disneyland was going to be this extremely valuable thing. In other words, that they were going to be able to partially raise it on that. But keep in mind that they raise rates all the time. This might have been a little bit more significant raising of the rates than I think we were used to. We dropped our annual passes, I think, when my wife got pregnant last year because we would have had to buy one for my son. That would have been too expensive. So I know a lot of people with annual passes, a lot of friends that I had in LA, they dropped their passes because it crossed that threshold to where it's like, well, it's no longer worth it for us. Or they look at it this way. We're going to take a couple years off from Disneyland and save some money. Save up some money and we'll get annual passes for our family a different year. So the annual passes, most of the people that are in Disneyland, like a big portion of the regular attendance outside of the high summer season is from annual pass holders. So we're talking about the summer season having a little bit lower attendance than what was normal. It's because they also raised the rate of getting into the parks. So there's some crossover there. You can't separate that out and say Galaxy's Edge is a failure. I know that that's the narrative that's there. And now it might be a failure and it might suck, but it's like 10% of the park, if that. It's like 2% of the park as far as what's attracting there. So people are either going away or either staying away because of the price or staying away for other factors. We were looking at Galaxy's Edge, personally, me and my wife, and we're like, there's no way we're going to go when there's going to be all these Star Wars fans trying to get into this park to see this Millennium Falcon. Now, my annual pass holder friends that were down there were like, we stayed away from the park because we expected more traffic than was there. But it turns out there wasn't that much traffic. So was that the business expecting it, or was that just us reacting to that? I think someone made a comment about economics isn't just consequences. It's this process. So I'm not sure. It's probably factored in there, but you can't ignore the raising of the price. Most families that are going there, Galaxy's Edge is not why they're going. They're going for Splash Mountain. They're going for the entire thing. And then there's still California Adventure on the other side where they haven't added any kind of new Star Wars crap. So I think it's the total value is too expensive for enough people. And Star Wars Land, as far as a value added, may not represent a significant value added. And that's probably true. It's not a significant enough value added to justify their rate raise. But that doesn't mean that that's the only reason people are staying away. I think it has more to do with the price. Anyway, that's my overlong explanation. Because it's a joint product, I don't think you can say, it's like kind of saying, how's the performance of bacon? Well, bacon's part of a pig. So the product is the pig and bacon comes out of a pig. So you can't look at saying, bacon's underperforming, or like the bacon, what's the average cost of bacon? Like you can't have this. It's the cost of the pig, right? It's a product produced jointly. It's like, what's the cost of the football of the Iowa State football team? There's the cost of the university. Now the team is produced jointly with it. Did you know there's a 1996 Robert E. Howard biopic? I did not know that. The Whole Wide World. I didn't know that. Thank you. Literally saw a urinal and a red IKEA rectangle block of wood presented as art as the LA CMA It's an excuse for talentless hacks with connections to push themselves in the industry. Absolutely. You could listen to my stream and learn for free. Thank you, Pew Pew Monger. No, less QQ, more Pew Pew. I've heard rumors that some postmodern paintings are made to use as money laundering tools. Possibly. As long as it's like a cash transfer. Whenever there's cash, it's disguise it. Usually it's going to be an arcade or a laundromat or something like that. When writing, should I make characters and their personality before the story and write the story and write the characters when I need them? You could do either one. I recommend you think about at least your main characters ahead of time. When I'm going to do that whole series that I explained, like how to write a book, and we're going to write a mini book together. Actually, I'm going to get another one out here. Let's turn on the fan. Nope. Harsh overhead lighting. It's underneath the Super Nintendo is where it is. Okay, let's grab some of these. Okay. So each of these is I wrote all 3 of these books in 30 days. So what we're going to do is we're just going to write one of them. We're going to write one book, the equivalent of one of these books, which is each of these books is between 30 and 40,000 words. The 2-hour books that I have are between 20 and 30,000 words. So we're going to write a book in a condensed format that's just basically a plot only, no B and C plots, or just maybe an A-B plot, and that's it. And we'll go through the steps and do it that way. And we'll start by designing our characters, our setting and our plot, doing the planning our budget for a book cover, all that kind of stuff. We'll go through the drafting phase, and I'll do live streams with the drafting phase to answer questions about how to manage that. Then we'll go through the editing phase. We'll talk about how we're going to edit. We'll do live stream on the editing phase. Then we'll publish the book. And so you guys, if you want to do this course, it's going to be free. I'm just going to do it on the channel through a live stream. You don't have to pay me anything. You can pay me super chats or buy a book if you want. But I want to do it as a service to help people who just there's very little out there that's like a step-by-step for how to just put it out, get it out. Like the publishing industry is so complicated. It turns a lot of authors off, or they want to use services and stuff. You don't need to. So you'll be able to put it out possibly for free if you're willing to do the cover design work. Keep in mind, I design my own covers, and it saves me several $100s per book, right? Because for me to have a good cover design, it's going to cost over $100, at least of this quality, right? With like all the photocomping and all the layers. Really easy Photoshop covers you can get for $50 though. So keep in mind that you can do it on a cheap. Anyway. So I'll do that. I recommend you think about the main characters at least at a time. World of Geekdom. Started your book, David. We'll finish it soon. Had some dental issues, but I'll be back. Okay, great. Yeah, dental issues suck. Nobody likes dental issues. I broke a tooth. All right, time to peel the layers off. It's like I have veneers on some of my teeth because they got ground down from like a bad orthodontic arrangement. Basically, my bite was set up so my teeth ground themselves down. So I got veneers. One of them broke, and it made me very mad because I have this like rough area in my tooth. I don't like it. So yes, people talk about my beautiful smile. I do have a beautiful smile. It's fake. It's like having fake boobs, guys. And it actually probably costs more than a boob job, if I'm being honest. Also, probably didn't cost as much as a boob job, but it's fake. No reason to not spend money on looking good, my friends. I missed where I was talking about. There you go. Let's see here. You don't need art school when you get professional artists teaching the tools on YouTube. Also, check out Art Camp by Noah Bradley, an artist that I respect and admire. He's probably on the opposite side of the political spectrum, but he probably agrees with me that art school is a waste of money. So he set up a thing called Art Camp to help people learn the techniques. He draws landscapes for Magic the Gathering. Very nice guy, creative guy, very talented artist, young guy. So he's definitely still developing. Also, Howard Lyon does like live painting. Howard Lyon is an amazing classical painting artist. If you want to know how to draw portraits that are, just watch him do it. He has such great technique with it. It's great. Howard Lyon is another one of my favorite newer artist guys. He does a lot of religious work. I think he's Mormon. So he does a lot of like religious art that is of Jesus and stuff, and religious themes from the Bible. And then he does like Magic the Gathering and book covers and stuff too. He does fantasy art. What a highly technically proficient guy. How much detail should I go into when talking about a character's emotions? Depends. I would say 0 detail. Show it rather than tell it. If you're writing in the first person, express it with an analogy that gets to the core of it rather than saying, I feel happy but sad. That tends to be what readers like. That's how I do it. That's my preference. You can do it any way that you want. But I think it's better to show, not tell. As far as emotions go, show the character being angry or have the character act in a way that can be interpreted as angry or sad or something rather than merely saying it. But sometimes you got to be efficient. And you say, Bert was filled with sadness when he heard this, and he sat down and hung his head in his hands. That'd probably be a good description where you could just say that. Don't forget about the white canvas in modern art museums. Disgusting. Government-funded art is garbage. It's the worst. Government-funded art in the capitalist West is worse than government-funded socialist art. Government-funded socialist art at least has standards and directions, even if it's propagandistic. It has artistic standards, and some of it's actually pretty good. But you can't say that it's reflecting a true artistic standard because it's not made for the artist. It's made for the state. Speaking of the Beatles, what are your thoughts on them and their music? I feel like they bat about 50%. Half of their music I enjoy, and the other half I think is not good. I find it either annoying or boring or some other combination there. So maybe that means I think they're a little overrated. Just depends what you like, you know. Mostly I find a lot of their songs to be too simple and too repetitive. But when they do it well, they do it really well. Here we go. Do you think lack of artistic freedom can sometimes have a good effect? Most of the best movies ever made were made during the Hays Code era. In some ways, it's good to have a limitation on what you're doing. Rather than thinking of it as lack of artistic freedom, you have limited tools at your disposal. Like maybe you can't use nudity. Okay, well, you have to figure out how to express beauty without showing breasts. Okay, that's going to force you to be more creative. So there's a difference between limitations and not having artistic freedom. Artistic freedom would be like you can't say X or Y. Well, I don't know. You could, now that I say that, you could probably think of them as the same thing. I think it can create more freedom. Just depends on how you do it. If you decide I'm going to write a piece of music and only write in the pentatonic scale, it's going to force you to be more creative in some ways versus having all the tones at your disposal. Don't forget the Beatles and Beach Boys inspired each other in a friendly rivalry. I think, unfortunately, that rivalry did not work out for who am I thinking of? Leader of the Beach Boys. Brian Wilson. He didn't end up so good. I feel very bad for him. Actually, I feel like he's kind of exploited. Like they kind of put him up on stage and he's not all there. What if Brian Wilson from the Beach Boys became a film composer? I don't think it would be good now. If you took Brian Wilson from like 1966, he'd be amazing. I think he had a lot of talent. I think he needed to develop more technique because the Beach Boys music has great harmonies, but they're all still very simple. It's not a broad palette. What's the most important thing to get right when writing thriller? Tension. Oh, geekdom. I had some dental issues come up, so I just started your book today. Can we record soon? Absolutely. Excited to pick your brain. I'm looking forward to it. Sorry for the delay. No problem. One comic book writer you might want to check out is Doug Ernst. Yeah. Douglas Ernst. Yes, I had a chat with him on Saturday. That was the day I had it. So I was on Thinking Critical's YouTube channel, which if you like comics, you can subscribe to him. He does a lot of great. He still reads tons of comics and has a lot to say about them. Doug's a very nice guy. I had a great chat with him. And yeah, Soulfinder Demons Match. It's very cool. Maybe we'll check that out. Maybe I'll have him on just to talk about the book. That would be a great guy to have on. Thoughts on Delius? I don't know what that is, I guess. Are you excited for Cyberpunk 2077? It's not even on my radar, actually. Do you think it'll help the cyberpunk genre grow in popularity? My answer is probably. I got a bunch of people who bought Muramasa because they played this Neo game and played this Sekiro game. And like, I decided I was really into this samurai setting, and I read your book. It's like, great. I'm so glad you read it. So yeah, I think it can. Totally. And that would be very cool. Bob says, you son of a gun, you're going to make me roll stinky dumb horde just to play with you. I don't really want to play horde, but my friends do, and it's more fun to play with your friends. I really prefer alliance. You spend a lot of time looking at the aesthetics, so I'd probably play, if I did alliance, I'd play a girl gnome rogue with pink pigtails. Nothing makes a horde player angrier than getting the shit kicked out of them by a gnome with pink pigtails that they didn't see. Let me tell you, you get forum posts from ganking people if you're a gnome. Like, gnomes, they just inspire hatred. And if you're a rogue, you can be a particularly cruel gnome. Just pop out, gank a lobby. God, man, I think I'm gonna make all my friends roll alliance just so I can roll gnome rogue. And it's gonna be a girl, and she's gonna have pink pigtails, and she's gonna wear the goggles, engineering goggles. So. Would you ever do an intro to playing D&D or a guide to being a DM? Yeah, I think that would be that's a great idea. I think that's a great idea. I think there's a lot of D&D channels, but none of them run by authors that I know of. So it'd be interesting. Not many people watch Jupiter Ascending. It was bad. Well, maybe I'll watch it and I can know why it's bad. Or it could be something like Valerian, where it's like there's lots of bad things about it, but it's so creatively interesting that you just like it anyway. Like, I loved Valerian just for the way it looked. I was like, man, these actors don't work. The dialogue's hammy. This girl is stiff as a board, and they're calling her a 10, and she's a 6.5. You know, I don't know why people think that girl's hot. I'm sorry. Maybe my standards are too high. It's possible. Or I'm like rebellious and contrarian. Anyway, could be like that. Thanks for your response to the Galaxy's Edge question. It's always great to get new perspectives on these things. That room is cool. I did not know you were an artist too. Alfonso Dunn, modern day James. Marco Bucci are amazing modern artists using the tools to make beautiful art. Yeah, there's so many great ones, but they're not studied in school. You know, nobody's like looking at Michael Whalen's art in school because they're like, whoa, he just draws book covers. It's like, you couldn't replicate. You know, before you say something's garbage, you should at least be able to say that you can replicate it. When it comes to putting a toilet on the wall and calling it art, that's something anyone can do. That's something we recognize. Hey, anyone can do that. When I look at I go look at a beautiful painting by like Caspar David Friedrich. I look at that and I'm like, I can't paint that, man. It's too special. And it's too well done. The technique is good. The emotions are there. It's beautiful. I can't do that because I mean, I could do it, but in order for me to say it sucks, I would have to be able to do better than it. When I say, and I know I do this like saying movies suck, it's like, well, I don't have $200 million to make a movie, but you know, you have to at least be able to have an understanding of something that's better, right? To say that something sucks, rather than it's popular, therefore it sucks. That's what I'm getting at. Let's see here. YouTuber Jonathan Pajal, I don't know how to say his name. Pajal, specializes in symbolism analysis, made an interesting video called Symbolism and Propaganda in Popular Culture. Would you be interested in seeing it? Yeah, at some point. Thank you for the recommendation. I don't know if I'll watch it. I can't promise anything because of just time. It's just hard to find time. Use your animal magnetism to make your friends play Alliance so we don't have to be stinky horde monster mash people. I might do it just for you. But this is something that I realize, right? Not to get too inside, but like, you know, I have a friend, he's trying to get a lot of people that he works with and he knows, try to get them all together to play. I'm like, it's going to fall apart. It's not going to work. I'm like, the way leadership works is you do something and you invite others to do it with you. I've learned this by being, I hate to talk about myself. I've learned this by being a reluctant alpha, a reluctant leader. As I've consistently had this lesson pounded into my head as I'm forced to take leadership positions in every organization or every band, everything I end up in, I have to be the leader and I have to be the commander in chief. because other people just lack the drive and the motivation. They lack the energy to get others to arrange around themselves. I always end up like running the guild because, you know, who else does it? I was so happy back a few years ago because me and my friends joined a guild that already had guild leaders and were running an established guild. I'm like, you mean I can just show up to raids? I don't have to organize the raids. I don't have to decide who's in the guild. I don't have to kick people out. I don't have to deal with this drama. I can just show up and talk to my friends and kill monsters. Oh my God. I just loved it for a while. You know, it was great. It was such a great feeling to like not have to lead, but I have a feeling that I'm going to end up having to do that. If I'm going to play for real, which means I'm just going to do something like, hey guys, I'm playing Pink Pigtail Gnome Rogue named Squinces over on this server, and you guys can play with me. I'm starting a new guild. It's called Riding with My Gnomies, and we're gonna go raid Orgrimmar, all gnomes, you know, whatever. And people do it. What if The Watchmen were remade as an animated film? I don't care about The Watchmen. I don't have an answer. Sorry. I didn't like the Watchmen movie very much, and I didn't really like the graphic novel's okay, but it's just nihilistic, just this deconstruction. I didn't like it. I thought it was kind of cheap. Not a great story. It uses like a slow reveal thing as a device instead of having actual plot. Did you read the Alexander Adams interview that I gave you? Oh yeah, I already knew about that, Hardwick. Thank you. Yeah, I already knew that. That's where I got the term cultural entryism was from him. Yes, thank you. I knew somebody pointed that out to me when that interview happened. I think whoever did the interview. What are your thoughts on the Watchmen comic book? It's okay. Like I said, it's okay. It's deconstruction stuff. It's not my favorite, graphic novel. I like 300 probably better, I guess, if you're going to compare it to a different kind of artistic graphic novel. But the thing is, you can only deconstruct something once. So once you've done Watchmen, you shouldn't do any more stuff like Watchmen. It should be done. Do you think that Calvin Coolidge was the best president of the 20th century? I don't know how to answer that. I think I don't know enough about Calvin Coolidge. He could have been. I don't think it's lack of drive or motivation. It's lack of courage. It's far safer to build consensus before. Yep. It's a great point. It's not your fault if it fails. Yeah, I mean, there's a freedom in not having the responsibility of failure. There's a big freedom in it. But yeah, if I want something to be successful, I've learned I just have to be the one who's running it. I gotta do everything. That's just how it ends up being with me. That's just what I've learned. It's why I did like an album all by myself. It's why I write books by myself. It's like collaborations are really hard. It's really hard to do collaborations as an adult with limited time and not be completely resentful of the other person for not doing enough work. It's a delicate balance. How do I describe something from our world that the characters do not know the name? Such as the settings post-apocalyptic and the encounter our current technology and materials. Let's say you're describing a TV. They saw a box with flashing images that they couldn't understand. Stephen King did this in The Gunslinger. Or not Gunslinger, in the Dark Tower series in the second book, Drawing of the Three. So Roland is describing all kinds of things he doesn't know what they are. So that'd be a good one to look at, because he comes from a post-apocalyptic world. Me and my gnomies. So, Tolkien tends to be more subtle with his symbolism, yes, saying he hated direct allegory, while C.S. Lewis is often more on the nose. Which approach do you prefer? I prefer Tolkien, but I like C.S. Lewis as well. Did you hear animation legend Richard Williams passed away? He had a hand in Roger Rabbit. I didn't hear that. Tried piecing together his masterpiece, The Thief and the Cobbler. Yeah, I didn't hear that. John Favreau. Again, I don't know how to pronounce the E-A-U. Is it Favreau? Is it like an umlaut? Recently said that he asked George Lucas for advice before making the TV show The Mandalorian. He said that Lucas told him to base the story on the hero's journey. Okay. Lucas also told him to be mindful that Star Wars is aimed primarily at young people, with the goal of passing the older generation's wisdom on so that they can avoid making the same mistakes. Interesting. I know that many people are dedicated, hardworking people, but when they're between jobs, they're hesitant to send out applications, afraid of rejection and failure. That's a good point. I mean, I'm afraid of failure. I think everyone's afraid of failing, but you have to do it, man. The master has failed more times than the student has attempted it. I don't know. Master's failed more times than the apprentice has tried. So yeah, I mean, before I wrote a book that was good, I wrote like 3 books that were bad. You just keep trying, man. I put out videos that no one watches, and I've been keenly aware of this. Where like I have a video that has like 500,000 views, and then I'm like, oh, I'm gonna capitalize on this, and I come out with a video that gets like 1,000 views, and you're like, I failed, or I've failed all kinds of things. Failure is part of life. No one wants to do it, but you just deal with it, and the failure makes you better because then you know what not to do. So every relationship fails until one doesn't, right? So when you break up with your girlfriend dumps you or something, the relationship fails. Oh my God, I don't know how to maintain a relationship with a woman. Well, it's a learning process. Every relationship fails until one doesn't. Every job is the wrong job because you're always looking for the next one, right? Failure is part of it. Okay, I'm probably going to have to call it there. Have you read C.S. Lewis' argument against adult literature being inherently better and in favor of adults being able to read? I haven't read it, but I agree with that sentiment. Oh, Nigelsacks, thank you for the 200 kronen. I appreciate it. The magic is in the mind. The magic's in the mind, but the medium is between us. It's between our minds. So when you want to tell a story that the audience loves, the medium is between us. It's not just in the mind. That's solipsistic and incorrect. So we like to be able to affect other people. That's why we do art. Bob says it's not an excuse. Was explaining that I think it's actual psychology behind it. I think so too. I think you're right. Yeah. Okay. 3 ways of writing for children. I'll check it out. I actually haven't read. I think the C.S. Lewis nonfiction I've read, I think, just amounts to the one he wrote on Christianity, Merely Christian. It's been a while. So thanks, guys. Thanks for watching this live stream. I know we've gone way over time. I really appreciate that. So I'll try to be shorter on time next time. Thanks so much, and I'll see you guys next time. You can find my books at dvspress.com. If you join the list, dvspress.com/list, then I will send you, automatic free book will be sent to you, and you can enjoy that. So thanks so much, and I'll see you guys next time.